This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Morning, it is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we find ourselves, well, I don't know, do you? Really? I mean, what are you most interested in? The question that I can't answer at the moment with regard to this continuing scandal of Elon Musk's attempt to intervene with lies and all manner of far-right provocations in British politics. Very sad to hear Laura Trott there in the news bulletins adding her voice to the pyre of liars, pretending that people calling for another national inquiry have been maligned as far-right by anybody. It's, of course, language like genocide rape apologist that fits into that category, or indeed Robert Jenrick's attempts to conflate criminals with every single person in this country who has come from or whose forebears have come here from the subcontinent in general or from Pakistan in particular. That is far-right rhetoric. To pretend, for example, that every white person in this country is somehow complicit in the child sexual abuse committed by white people, or every Christian is somehow complicit in the child sexual abuse committed by priests and vicars and church workers, or the cover-ups undertaken by everybody from the outgoing Archbishop of Canterbury down. That is what Robert Jenrick is doing to brown people. Make no mistake, and that is far right. But for somebody like Laura Trott, who I'd like to say must know better, but I remember her interview with Evan Davis on Radio 4 when she displayed, a quite outstanding ignorance of her own brief as a Treasury Minister. So I'm not sure I can say with any confidence that she does know better. But it doesn't stop it being dishonest. It just leaves hanging the question of whether it's a blatant lie or or an exercise of epic ignorance. So I'm fascinated by the politics of it. The most important element is one that has been overlooked by almost everybody, but I don't currently see a way in which we, during our time together every morning, can somehow steer this conversation back to survivors and victims. I'm fairly confident that the loudest voices you are hearing, voices that have been silent on all of these issues for 14 years, care not a jot for the survivors and the victims. Otherwise, they would not allow themselves to remain silent while Jess Phillips, who's dedicated her entire life, essentially, professional life, working life, to looking after survivors and victims of male violence, they wouldn't possibly countenance staying silent while Elon Musk arguably incites some of the death threats that we now know she has received. But silent they remain. That was yesterday's conversation. I'm tempted to return to it, but I think I'm probably a little bit more interested than you are in the rubric of party political recalibration. And then I find myself thinking, and it's Jenrick's words in particular. Jenrick has made a very clear and explicit play for the kind of territory. And it's not often I have anything nice to say about Nigel Farage. But this is the kind of territory that has been ploughed by Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who goes by myriad other names and has, of course, committed all manner of crimes, but who is probably most popularly known as Tommy Robinson. Robert Jenrick has now essentially hitched himself to Tommy Robinson's hideous bandwagon, probably because Elon Musk did so first. And Jenrick's calculation will be that Kemi Badenoch won't lead the Conservatives into the next general election, possibly a rare example of him being correct. But remember, even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And so whether she understands this or not, he is agitating to turn the Conservative Party into a far-right movement, which will go into the next general election with the support of Elon Musk. If you think about the two things that preceded or coincided with Jenrick's hideous intervention, one would be Musk essentially embracing the rancid lies of the serial criminal Tommy Robinson, and the other would be Musk suggesting that Farage wasn't fit to lead the Reform UK Limited. Those two things put together in the twisted mind of Robert Jenrick could quite easily, quite conceivably have created an opportunity in his own mind for him to lay down an early marker on leading the sort of Conservative Party that Elon Musk would help get elected in the way that he used his epic power and money to help Donald Trump get elected. But like I said, you may not be as interested in the rubric of the recalibration of British party politics as I am, or at least not yet, given that the next general election is 4.5 years away. I think Andrew Norfolk's interventions today are absolutely crucial. I don't know who you read yesterday or who you watched on the television or who you listened to on the radio, but quite a lot of people somehow claimed that because Andrew Norfolk at the Times had led the line on bringing these stories to public attention, then the fact that Tony Gallagher, the editor of the Times, is trying to cause trouble for Keir Starmer by calling for a national inquiry somehow achieved a patina of credibility. He also, of course, spoke to the Newsagents podcast, which I heartily recommend, from yesterday. Andrew Norfolk. I mean, a ludicrous conceit to claim that the Times' current support for another national inquiry is somehow bolstered by the fact that Andrew Norfolk did his work for the Times back in 2012. Well, I mean, Andrew Norfolk himself has now shot that fox by saying categorically that he thinks a new investigation probably wouldn't help. He points out some problems in the past, but he also points out what the solutions were. Andrew Norfolk has defended Sir Keir Starmer from the accusations of Elon Musk. When he was director of public prosecutions, Norfolk was revealing the grooming and sexual abuse of vulnerable girls across the north, across towns and cities in the north, and he was revealing the reluctance of child protection authorities to take action in towns including Rotherham, Rochdale and Telford. And Norfolk has revealed that he met with Starmer. They discussed how the guidelines were hampering prosecutions, and I want to put the record straight on this, Norfolk said. It was Starmer who changed the rules to make more prosecutions possible. That happened, and there was a huge increase in convictions. There is now much greater awareness of what was happening, and where it is identified, it must be tackled. Priorities, budgets and training have changed massively. In any normal country, this would no longer be a controversy. Because yesterday, everybody was rightly citing Andrew Norfolk as an unparalleled authority in this area. The investigative journalism he did off the back of some of the concerns raised by the Labour MP Anne Cryer was absolutely exemplary and quite rightly award-winning. He is the kind of journalist who you can fairly confidently state has no political axe to grind. Used to be the case with most journalists, actually, certainly most newspaper journalists. He has no political axe to grind. So when he credits Starmer, essentially with being the single most significant figure in the United Kingdom when it comes to actually pursuing the perpetrators of this type of child sexual abuse, an awful lot of voices that were yesterday calling for a national inquiry and claiming that Andrew Norfolk's work was somehow in support of their position will either put their hands up and say, I'm terribly sorry, I got that horribly wrong, or they won't refer to it at all. No prizes for guessing what is the most likely course for the kind of cowards who have spent the last 14 years telling you that we were going to have jam tomorrow and then going absolutely silent when no jam turned up at all. I find this intervention crucial. I find it essential, but I also find it depressing because just as Alexis Jay has said that she doesn't think there should be another national inquiry, just as Nazir Afzal, who led the prosecution of grooming gangs, has said that he doesn't think there should be another national inquiry. Now, so Andrew Norfolk says he doesn't think there's much point in another national inquiry, but opportunistic Tory MPs, Billy Buncher-Numbers on Twitter and various other grifters who are either making their money from social media posts or being paid by disreputable media companies, they will continue to pretend that they are either unaware of this or that they don't understand it. So where do we go today? Another comment from Norfolk includes the phrase utterly staggering that the issue has reignited so long after it was first exposed. It seems that Musk clicks his fingers, shoots his mouth off, and the whole British establishment responds. I find it surprising that man wields that much power, which takes us back to my opening comments at 10 o'clock on Monday morning about why, tempting though it would be to ignore Elon Musk, it's the reaction to his hideous interventions that has to be talked about and has to be reported. It is currently defining political discourse in this country. You think of all the problems that the country faces, all of the issues, all of the challenges, and because Elon Musk's power is such, and because the knee bending and the cap doffing is so acute in so many corners of right-wing politics and media, we have no choice but to continue to address these issues. But it is to Robert Jenrick that we turn next, because I felt a little bit blindsided when, and we may listen again to these comments, when Samuel Kasumi, the former race advisor to Boris Johnson, elected to describe Robert Jenrick as potentially the most divisive figure in the country. I find him simultaneously ridiculous and hideous. You know, I think he was found to have broken the law in his dealings with a property tycoon and planning permissions. We know that he's most famous, of course, for ordering that murals in a processing centre for unaccompanied child asylum seekers be painted over, lest they derive the tiniest crumb of comfort from a picture of Mickey Mouse after they have arrived in an entirely alien country with terror and loneliness defining their every moment. So when Samuel Kasumi came out, former race advisor to Boris Johnson, remember, and described Robert Jenrick in terms, I felt a little bit blindsided. I found myself thinking maybe we should have paid a little bit more attention to what this hideous human being is up to. So today we will. And I think what I want to do is ask how it feels to be one of the entirely innocent people that Robert Jenrick is clearly trying to turn the British public against. Because he's gone full Yaxley Lennon now in his language about hundreds of thousands of people and mass immigration. The ultimate aim of the far right, always, throughout history, is to make innocent people complicit in the crimes of guilty people. Why was there a Holocaust in the 1930s and the 1940s? Because somehow Hitler succeeded in disseminating the lie that every Jewish person in the world was somehow responsible for the financial control that he also lied about, some Jewish people exercising over the entire world economy. So the necessity of removing them all from the face of the earth was something that members of the public were persuaded to swallow. That conflation between guilty, whether actual or not, whether truly guilty or not guilty at all, that conflation between the allegedly guilty and the demonstrably innocent is the single most toxic element of extremist ideology through the ages. And Robert Jenrick has bought into it with his full chest, trying to conflate every British Pakistani in the country with the hideous scum that have undertaken the kind of crimes with which we have all been grimly familiar. Well, I say all. Everyone who's followed this story since Andrew Norfolk broke it in 2012 is grimly familiar with the details of those hideous crimes. Of course, Yaxley Lennon makes his money by telling people who weren't aware of what had already been reported, published in the news and taken to court, that it's all some sort of cover-up, and send me money so I can continue recycling work that other people have done, or indeed endangering cases of actual child sex abusers by turning up with my video camera and pretending that I'm a journalist. Jenrick's bought into that. Make no mistake. They know what they're doing. Make no mistake. Every commentator, every pundit, every politician, every columnist, every broadcaster, every journalist knows what Andrew Norfolk has said on this subject. They know what Professor Alexis Jay has said on this subject. They know what Nazir Afzal has said on this subject. They know what the Select Committee in 2013 said, echoing in a way what Andrew Norfolk said yesterday about Sir Keir Starmer's unique place in British history when it comes to the pursuit and the prosecution of these scumbags. Unique place. As Director of Public Prosecutions, nobody could do more, and he did it. Don't take my word for it. Ask Andrew Norfolk, the man which a lot of Jenrick or Tory cheerleaders yesterday were citing as the only authority worth listening to on this issue. Well, he's embarrassed them by speaking. And again, I refer you back to the interview that he conducted with my colleagues on the Newsagents podcast yesterday. So this is it. You know, we used to do phone-ins on this program about what it was about this certain demographic, the overrepresentation of men with a Pakistani background in this very specific type of child sexual abuse, the grooming and the raping of children. One glitch in the data, which Jess Phillips referred to yesterday, is that the actual ethnic apportioning, if you like, could be better. But no one ever points to the 80+% of crimes in the broader field of child sexual abuse being undertaken by people who look like me, by being undertaken by white men and often family members of the victims. But that's not entirely relevant to this conversation. What is relevant to this conversation is Jenrick talking about hundreds of thousands of migrants coming from countries and cultures that have backwards attitudes to women, conflating every single person of a certain background with the most hideous of criminals, as if because your parents came here from Lahore, you are not going to be absolutely outraged and disgusted by what these grooming gangs did. It's as if suggesting that if you grew up in Kidderminster, like I did, you wouldn't be repulsed by the actions of Jimmy Savile. Or because you grew up in Hull, you would somehow be comfortable with the decades of child sexual abuse undertaken by Catholic priests or scoutmasters or football coaches who happen to be the same colour as you or happen to have come from the same part of the globe. So Robert Jenrick has moved into a space that is historically hideous. It is in some ways it's beyond xenophobic. It's the rhetoric of conflation, the conflation of the guilty, the conflation of the depraved, the conflation of the gross with the wholly innocent on the grounds of geographical origin. Are you guilty or innocent? Well, it depends where your parents were born. Are you good or bad? Well, it depends what colour you are. Are you honest or guilty? Well, it depends whether or not you have Pakistani forebears. That's where he's gone, that's what he's done, and that's why we're talking about him today. So how does it feel? I know that one Conservative peer has called upon Jenrick to, quotes, reflect on his comments, Lord Ahmed. I think, forgive me for not knowing off the top of my head, I still haven't fully processed how many of them got handed their sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap after the last general election. But I can only imagine what some British Muslim Tory politicians of Pakistani extraction may feel about this hideous conflation. So what does it feel like to know that Robert Jenrick is talking about you? Mentioned yesterday a few individuals of British Pakistani origin who have done a hell of a lot more work in this field than Robert Jenrick ever will. Most obviously my friend Adil Ray, who made documentaries about this when the phrase child grooming gang wasn't even in public parlance. Most obviously Nazir Afzal, who I think will be joining us on the programme on Friday, who led the prosecution. And then the former Channel 4 journalist as well, Channel 4 news journalist, whose name temporarily eludes me, who was doing incredible work in this field around the same time that Andrew Norfolk was. So now you know the facts, and you won't like them, of course, if you have been persuaded by, or if you are comfortable with, or even perhaps turned on by the idea of holding all brown people responsible for the crimes of these scumbags, or all British Muslims responsible for the crimes of these scumbags, or all British Pakistanis responsible for the crimes of these scumbags. Make no mistake, some people will lap it up. Some people will love it. Some people have been buying into it for years. Even the most cursory glance at social media will show you that Islamophobia, which of course people like Jenrick don't even like the word, is rife. What's it like now to be a British Muslim? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. That's all. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you're not feeling conflated at all. Maybe when Robert Jenrick talks about the country from which your parents, your grandparents, or possibly you came here to make a life, to end up perhaps as Mayor of London. But my God, it's time they all started integrating, isn't it? Elected Mayor of London 3 times, a British Pakistani Muslim. I'm reading today about how they need to integrate more. Well, you can't get much more integrated than that. And when it was announced that Sadiq Khan was about to get a knighthood, I didn't see many people of a Robert Jenrick persuasion jumping up and down in celebration at such a wonderful example of successful integration. It's almost as if that's another massive lie as well, just like the idea that your country of origin somehow determines your complicity in hideous crimes. So what's it like when you see a man who could very easily have been leader of His Majesty's opposition talking about you and your background in terms that are explicitly and deliberately designed to make people hate you? How does it actually feel? Not all cultures are created equal, says Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader. We should be very careful about who is coming into this country and the scale of immigration. Pakistani men are overrepresented in those who are involved in the grooming gangs, while white Christians are overrepresented in those who are involved in the Church of England and the Catholic Church scandals. But I don't notice anybody claiming that my culture is inferior to theirs. So what does it feel like to be British and Muslim today? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Okay? That's all I want to know, because I don't think this is one of those days when I try to persuade myself that things aren't quite as bad as they look. The men who undertook these crimes are scum. Everybody in the country who didn't is entirely and wholly innocent. And yet Robert Jenrick wants you to think that somehow him over there, them over there are guilty. What does it feel like to be him over there? What does it feel like today to be them over there? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I'll read you a couple of the messages I'm getting at the moment from people who are desperate to live in a country where if you're brown, you are considered to be at least inferior and at most downright dangerous. It's 10:25.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:27 is the time. We should also, of course, mention Jess Phillips, who broke cover yesterday to deliver a number of interviews in which it was clear that this has taken an enormous toll on her. Genocide rape apologist is the phrase that Elon Musk elected to use to describe a woman who everybody in the field of child protection, women protection, male violence, every single person who works in that field will have nothing but warm words. In fact, the warmest words, up to and including survivors of precisely the sort of child sexual abuse that is under discussion in this country at the moment. And yesterday she broke cover to reveal the toll that it has taken on her. And I don't know if she did. I didn't see all of the interviews, but goodness knows how she processes the knowledge that some of her parliamentary colleagues, past and present, have not just stayed silent while she has a target painted on her back that is now being acknowledged by people making actual death threats, but in the case of people like Liz Truss, has actually joined in. Anyway, back to the question of how it feels to know that Robert Jenrick is talking about you, as innocent as me, of any of these crimes, any of these attitudes, any of these opinions, any of these views. But Robert Jenrick is talking about you. Or maybe you don't think he is, in which case the number remains the same, 0345 6060 973. Shah's in Cardiff. Shah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
thank
mate.
you for taking my call. Thank you. And thank you for highlighting these issues and putting a more balanced slant on what we're experiencing.
Well, what are you experiencing?
I think so. I'm from Wales. I'm of Pakistani origin, and I'm third generation, effectively. You know, my grandfather came into the country to help for the Commonwealth, and essentially we established our family and our generations here, in Wales. So
your grandfather was one of the hundreds of thousands of people from alien cultures who had medieval attitudes towards women, according to Robert Jenrick.
Well, apparently, yes. But sadly, no, that's not the real reflection, actually. And my lived experience is completely different to what the conflations we see in the media, and what politicians are acting really irresponsible about, rather than celebrating people. I mean, look, my background, and I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I'm the regional lead for hip surgery in where I am. I serve my community diligently. I am Welsh, to all intents and purposes, that's my identity.
Yeah, but when are you going to integrate, Shah?
Well, this is it. What more do I need to do to integrate? And constantly, I listen to your show. I listen to a variety of shows. I'm interested in geopolitics, and I guess so disheartened and upset about, how people are being portrayed, and certain cultures will be conflated with the actions of very few. And there's almost a complete degradation of humanity, moral standards, and just we talk about values, but where are the values of understanding? And it really upsets me and baffles me that we are taking a very dark turn in our human history and humanity.
And how personal does it feel? It's interesting that you're third generation and Welsh, clearly Welsh, not just by description and identification, but by accent as well. And yet, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel that Robert Jenrick is talking about you.
I feel the personal attack.
Right.
And look, this is a trend. This is a ongoing theme that has occurred in recent years, where we conflate certain terrorist attacks that happen in X country or anywhere in the world that gets then targeted in terms of it's a Muslim problem or it is a ethnic problem, when it could be, a few bad apples that really enact those issues, And it's the same thing that, sorry, please.
No, I'm much more interested. I've said more than enough already today. I shouldn't have made any noises at all there, Shah. You can still smile, you can still laugh, you feel it will pass, but is it the worst it's ever been, do you think, in the very specific context of conflation? Now that it's Jenrick doing what previously would have been confined to Stephen Yaxley Lennon and his acolytes.
Of course. And I think, the Yaxley... Tommy 10 names, as you like to call it, that was, you could sort of reconcile that. You can say, well, okay, he is a fringe character. He is someone that is on the extreme right. And, it represents one side of the extreme that he's fighting another extreme right now. But now we are getting into a position where things are a bit more brazen. They're becoming mainstream, and people of responsibility and credibility, or seeming credibility, and people that represent us as politicians in the country are going down this path. And the only thing that I can see is that we are turning more and more right-wing, which is quite a scary prospect for me. I don't want to live in a world where my kids are growing up having to justify their position and their identity when I've never had to do it throughout my life, and now I'm feeling as if there's almost a personal attack. I feel it. It's a depressing prospect.
It is a depressing prospect, and I hope you don't mind me repeating what it is that you do as the lead for hip replacements in the whole of Wales, the national lead, an orthopaedic surgeon there who has done more to help the British public in the course of his career than Robert Jenrick could dream of, and yet it is people like Shah. Hey, by all means, ring me and tell me that we're wrong. This is not what Robert Jenrick is trying to do. He's not trying to conflate the actions of hideous human beings with the hundreds of thousands of people who, through the auspices of the Commonwealth itself and the Empire, as Shah reminds us, made their way to the motherland, or their forebears made their way to the motherland in recent years. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I wonder if Robert Jenrick's mum needed a new hip, he'd refuse to let Shah operate on her. I wonder. Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:37. Richard's been in touch. He says lies and lies and more lies from LBC. LBC completely out of touch with how the country outside of London feels, because nothing says London-centric like a call from the Welsh national lead for hip replacements, mate. Does it? Give your head a wobble. But Richard believes that outside London, everybody feels as Robert Jenrick feels, that all Muslims are complicit, guilty, inferior, wrong, and somehow involved in or adjacent to the crimes committed by a tiny proportion of their population, just as, presumably, Robert Jenrick believes that me, as someone raised a Catholic, bears responsibility for the abuses visited upon altar boys and others over the decades by Catholic priests. I'm probably complicit in the actions of the monks, the paedophile monks who abused my school friends. In Robert Jenrick's world, that the medieval attitudes that Benedictine monks carried into the 20th century and led them to abuse my school friends. No doubt I'm to blame for that as well, because of the hundreds of thousands of Catholics in this country. You see how disgusting he is? And yet, of course, we are insulated from the full impact of his horrific conduct because we are not... Most of us are not British Pakistani Muslims. But what if you are? How does this feel? It's not Tommy Robinson anymore. It's not even Farage speaking about fifth columnists and doing as he always does, very cleverly walking the tightrope between what is acceptable and what is not. Robert Jenrick has jumped off it and dived headfirst into what was previously unacceptable. It's a move of the Overton window that Kemi Badenoch has endorsed. People I would love to hear from: Saeed Avasi, Sajid Javid, Lord Ahmad. I think of other prominent British Muslims who've supported the Conservative Party. I'd love to hear from them. 10:39 is the time. Farah is in Southfields. Farah, what would you like to say?
Hi, thank you for having me on. We've spoken a couple of times before. So you have to bear with me because I'm a little bit emotional because it's been quite hard. I'm a British Pakistani 48-year-old, second generation British person. Gosh,
Yeah.
it gets exhausting having to how many labels I have to put on myself. So I'm not a man. I was born here. My parents moved over. My dad moved over in 1952, my mum in the 70s. And everything that's been going on since the summer, but especially what Jenrick is just so blatantly saying now, is exactly what, unfortunately, my mother said to me when I was 10 years old. And there's real heartbreak in this as well, because when I was 10, I was, studying for my 11 plus, and she said, Farah, don't ever think that everybody else is going to think that you're just like them. She said, your white friends, the white population, they will not accept you as equal. You are not. So you are going to have to work much harder, make a career for yourself, and make sure you have a skill, because they've let us in and one day they'll kick us out. And those words to me at 10, I mean, I'm 48 now, and they've carried with me my entire life. And she doesn't remember saying them anymore. She's going to be 80 this year. And this is her country. When we have family coming from Pakistan who say, oh, well, this is the way it's happening in the UK and how, people like us are being treated. She says, I don't care. This is my country. This is where I live. This is the country I love. I am British. And the bizarre thing is that the words that she said to me 40-odd years ago are now coming back to haunt me now. I have made decisions about my children and almost masking their identity to a certain degree. My husband's white and Irish, so we don't have a Muslim surname. I always wanted to call my kids certain names. I changed them. Their first names are kind of, you would think, you wouldn't be able to say, you wouldn't say it's English, but you wouldn't be able to say it's anything else.
Culturally neutral.
Culturally neutral. And then they have beautiful Irish, middle names, in the middle. And bizarrely, their surname kind of sounds French. It's all very weird.
Okay.
So, so that, because I've been in recruitment for the last 27 years, I have seen, and more so in the last 4 months, and this was happening just after 9/11 as well, Muslim candidates changing their names on their CVs. English names,
yes.
And I've seen a huge uptick now. So I've made decisions on the basis that actually I know we don't belong here. So the Jenricks and all of those people,
they know precisely what they do. Can I ask you? Sorry to interrupt, but has it like the resonance of your mum's warning? Has it ebbed and flowed over the course of those 38 years? So there have been times when you thought, oh, don't be silly, Mum. And then there have been times like now when you thought, oh, my days, she's right.
I think I thought, it worried me.
Yeah.
But then I was very lucky that I went to a bunch of really nice kids and nice families and all the rest of it. So it just didn't take until I think I was in my mid-20s. And I used to work for a recruitment firm, a sales firm. We were in we've been taken away somewhere really nice, and the CEO just sat down. He didn't realise I was walking past him, and I just heard the word saying, well, if I had my way, I wouldn't have any women, coloureds, or gays in the company. He's no longer with that company, and that company no longer exists. But I did resign very quickly afterwards. The reason I was there as one of his top performers, I was making him millions. So I heard that, and that was one of the things where it just hit me in the face, because I just thought...
There's nothing I can do about that. There's nothing I can ever do about that. You know, you could be elected mayor of London. You could be elected mayor of London 3 times running, but they give you a knighthood, and the Islamophobia comes out at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, and I mean, we are now... I mean, I turned around to my husband after the riots, and I just said, you know what? And can I just say just one thing? Yeah. The children I'm raising... These are children who want to go out into society, our society, and make it better. One wants to be a doctor. She wants to be a psychiatrist. She wants to work with children. The other one wants to be a human rights lawyer. I'm not raising children who won't do anything but the maximum they can possibly think of in terms of making a difference in our society. And I've never felt more disconnected from this country, and I feel like I've been lying to myself my whole adult life.
Well, Jenrick is Jenrick, and his supporters and admirers are his supporters and admirers, but he is not Britain.
I know he's not Britain, but, you know, they were setting hotels on fire in the summer with people who were immigrants. They were attacking mosques. This all has happened, and it's as if there was enough attention on it at the time, and you don't want to harp on about it all the time. But
I think we should. I think we should remind ourselves what it looks like.
Changed?
Yes,
I'd say it kind of got better up until, and then obviously 9/11 happened.
Yeah,
and then obviously that became very difficult if you were brown and vaguely looking like an Arab or possibly a Muslim.
Yeah,
and then it did die down for a bit. And then, you know, as time has gone on, because the Conservatives have no policies whatsoever. I'm not ranting about them. They're a complete waste of space. They've got nothing.
They weren't always. Remember, it's the party that made Saeed Abbasi chairman.
I love her. She's amazing. And you know, the podcast that she's done, and she was at my kid's school before Christmas doing some work there as well. It was absolutely amazing. She's a phenomenal role model.
She's kind of warned that this was coming, hasn't she? From her own party.
Yes, I've read all her books, you know, and even the most recent one. I mean, but you don't have to be hugely educated or, you know, in the media to understand this. All you have to do is listen to people who are calling in on the radio and having a look at what's written in the papers.
And going unchallenged, of course, because you can, you know, everyone's welcome to ring in to me, but it's a question of whether or
it's
a question of whether or not they get challenged. Of course, that's the real horror that you're enduring.
I think, you know, sort of, we talk about multiculturalism and do Muslims fit in? You know, we've all really tried. And when you get people like Jenrick saying the things that he has and stuff that happens like the riots, and then they say, why doesn't the Pakistani Muslim community integrate? Why on earth would we if people are going to attack us and say that we're criminals? And if we all left tomorrow, let's see what happens to the NHS and everything else.
Final question. I'm going to run out. I'm going to run out of time.
Sure.
And I'm glad that you've had this opportunity to get, obviously, some of this off your chest. Although I can't imagine what it's like to be feeling it as opposed to listening to it. In the context of the grooming gangs and the, you know, disproportionate representation of a British Pakistani background in this very specific type of child sexual abuse that is, I think, being cynically focused upon, but you can't get away from some of the statistical elements of it. The idea that you would respond to that with less horror or less outrage than, for example, I would.
Absolute rubbish. Oh, my God. It's just, what is wrong with people? We are surely far more intelligent. It is, you know what, the fact that there is a statistical, some sort of type of relationship in this, and do you know how embarrassed and just, it burns me to my core that I have anything DNA-wise that's connected to that group of monsters. I'm a mother, I have children, I have girls, I have teenage girls. You know, it's very difficult to even listen to this regardless of who's doing it. Those people are monsters. There are monsters everywhere, but those people are monsters. And I'm sorry, but if anybody in my community, and I don't hear it from anyone I know, is saying, oh, well, they're just picking on us. No, these are crimes that happen. 7-year investigation. There are recommendations. Can we please implement those recommendations? Because the Tories certainly didn't do it. Labour need to, implement them. And all the stuff around Jess Phillips yesterday, she's tremendous. And I really don't like Starmer, but my God, if Musk and the rest of them carry on having a go, I'm probably going to end up having to vote for him again, just out of the fact that everybody else is so vile. I mean, but thank you for the time.
You're very welcome, Farah. I feel like I probably shouldn't have interrupted you at all. Thank you. And I'm sorry for what you're going through. And I'm grateful to you for articulating it so well. It won't touch the sides of some people. Let me have a quick look in my inbox. Here you go. Mark Pleasance writes, the fact is Islam isn't compatible with the UK's values and Western way of life. That's the bottom line. So you've just heard from Farah. And you've heard from Shah, the orthopaedic surgeon, and you've somehow heard proof that the faith they follow, or the faith into which they were, I was going to say born, but of course none of us are actually born into a faith, the faith in which they were raised. You've just heard proof, Mark, that it's not compatible with your values, which makes me wonder, mate, what on earth your values are.
James O'Brien on LBC.
52 is the time. Does he mean trad wives in America, do you think? The increasingly popular movement that sees a return to the idea that women are chattels, that they belong to men. Does he mean perhaps the lovely rabbi I sat next to at an event last year who was adamant that he couldn't sit next to my wife because she was a woman? Does Robert Jenrick mean him? When he talks about medieval attitudes towards women being brought into this country, do you think he does mean them? Unlikely. Maybe. I'm sure he'd be able to explain himself. But interesting that British Muslims listening to this programme, and indeed listening to Robert Jenrick's recent comments, feel that he is talking about them when they have no more involvement in the crimes of the grooming gang members than he does. I don't think today's a day for asking what he's up to. I think today's a day for asking what it feels like to fear or to know that Robert Jenrick is talking about you and yours. Or to explain to me why you're confident that he isn't. Arif is in Slough. Arif, what would you like to say?
Well, hi. Good morning, and thank you for taking me. Happy New Year.
You too.
James, the problem is, I think it's deep down, it's because of the economic problems we are facing. We have seen that in 1920s and then 30s and whatever happened later on. Often some selfish politicians takes the advantage of economic meltdown and try to divide people and throw these things. But the problem also lies to us individuals who are not making some efforts to learn the civilization or the civic values or humanity at first place. I'm a first-generation British man. I have two daughters. One is a medical doctor. Other one is a civil engineer. She did her master in engineering with the first-class honors. What on earth you want me to do more? I myself, I did my master's in business administration. It's a prestigious degree as well. Generalization generally is very bad. Wherever you go, whatever you decide, you shouldn't generalize. But we need to educate people, our compatriots, our co-citizens, that this is not the way forward. The way forward is harmony. More harmony will have better chances to survive economic meltdowns and all those things. So it's for the greater good. Yeah,
I mean, you're not wrong. I think that probably there wouldn't have been a Brexit, the xenophobia that propelled Brexit, without the global financial crisis of 2008. Is there any way, And I hesitate to ask you this question because it comes from a position of privilege, really, because I could never be in your shoes on this kind of issue. But is there any way in which we could persuade ourselves, or you could persuade yourself, that Robert Jenrick is not intending people to look differently at people like you and your children when he makes these comments?
No. He's taking advantage and spreading the wrong sort of information. And I mean, you have given the statistics, what more facts people want. But the problem is, some people are vulnerable to this sort of bombardment of false information.
Well, and some people love it. So it's always hard to tell the difference between the people who, if you like, have been persuaded by bad actors, and the people who do actually subscribe to a sort of supremacist or bigoted worldview.
Yeah, that's why I said I think we all need to do some sort of efforts, like in our schools. The best thing starts from the school. The best learning is from the schools, apart from the parents.
Yeah, well, the Anne Frank Trust, which I've had some involvement with in the past, does extraordinary work in this field, sending children of all backgrounds into schools and sending experts into lecture and try to preach harmony. But I'm haunted by Farah's words, which I know you heard and I know resonated with a lot of people. It doesn't matter what you do. And I'm going to come back to, you could be elected mayor of London 3 times and receive a knighthood from the King, and people would still come out and attack you. So what the hell does integrated mean to the people who keep insisting that you need to be more integrated?
I really don't know what these people want, and I understand there will always be some people like these, like spreading these stupid things. I as a first generation British, yes, I'm fearful of those things because things can turn wrong. It has been done. The case.
We've seen it in the past. We've seen it in the past. We probably thought somewhat
some innocent people
naively that it couldn't happen here, or that I certainly used to think that. But of course, recent events in the United States of America make it crystal clear that it absolutely could. And the decision of Robert Jenrick to do this means that some people, very senior people in British politics, want it to happen here. Arif, thank you. 10:58 is the time. We're squeezing at least one more call. Sophie's in Mitcham. Sophie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hello. Thank you for having me on again. I was on a few weeks ago when we spoke about the church and child protection, and right. I was very passionate then. And I don't know where to start. But very ironically, when I inspect schools, because I've been deputy head, deputy head, blah blah, and I actually inspect schools on what are British values.
Yes.
That's one thing, and so that's one thing, and then another thing. Maybe I've never ever culturally hidden what I am, because I couldn't. I didn't. That would have been. My mum was a warrior lioness, and. Right. It would have shamed her. My very first memory that I have, one of the very first memories I have, I was probably about 7 years old. My mum took me, my 2 sisters, and my 3 cousins to, those Lidos, those open swimming pools.
Yes, of course.
It was a really, really hot day. So we walk in, and the majority of the people there are white. And the area that we were in, they were white, working class. And 1 minute my mum's there, and the next minute we can't find my mum. Right. And we're like 6 primary school age girls. And the next second, my mum she can't swim. She pulls herself out of the pool. She's been pushed in to the deep end of the swimming pool by a white lad, a group of white boys. My mum got out and she went to the lifeguard and she said, "This is what's happened. I can't swim. I pushed myself out. Can you help me find them?" And he said, "No, I can't." I learned many lessons that day. She actually figured out who it was. She lined them up on a wall and she gave them such an ear bashing. And we were absolutely mortified. Well,
and also fearful, I imagine, of what might happen to her as a consequence of doing that.
I don't ever think I've ever feared for my mum, ever, because I'm telling you, she was a warrior. She was just like, she was my hero. And so, following that, we were mortified and we wanted to go home. And my mum said, sit. You will sit and you will eat the picnic that I have made. And she was sopping wet from head to toe. And the lesson that I learned is you don't run away from who you are. And I was 6 or 7. And then I remember sitting there and having a big bag of sandwiches. And there was like a 20-something white couple. And they started talking and laughing at us. And my mum turned around and said, now, if you're going to say something, just say it. But don't laugh like that.
What a woman.
She was amazing. And she was almost, where I'm third generation, but she came over with my grandfather. So, she learnt her Englishness, her English, her everything here.
And yet, I've got 2 previous callers ringing in my ears as you speak. Farah's mum's comments about, you'll never really be welcome. You'll never truly fit in. And Arif, the previous caller as well, leading me to ask you what I asked him. Is there any way we can persuade ourselves that Robert Jenrick is not trying to make people think of people like you when they think of grooming gangs?
No, he's not, because when he sees me, if I were to go for a job interview, if I were to lucky enough to get through a job interview with my name, and then if he were to look at me, he would make those judgments, because he's just a certain type of person. My doctoral research is in generational trauma, 1947 partition, India, Pakistan, to current my children and my children's children, whenever they have them. And unfortunately, I have come, or fortunately, I don't know, to the conclusion that the human mind is as advanced as it can get.
We're moving into evolution at 2 minutes after 11, and I understand why, but I think it might be too big a mountain to start climbing at such a point in the programme. I'll leave you this hour with 2 quotes from Kemi Badenoch. The first quite recent. She says, "This nonsense of attacking anyone with a different viewpoint as, quotes, divisive, end quotes, has to stop." I'll say that again. So the leader of His Majesty's opposition. "This nonsense of attacking anyone with a different viewpoint as, quotes, divisive, end quotes, has to stop." That's Kemi Badenoch, who never makes gaffes, remember. Never has to apologise for misspeaking because she never makes gaffes. That's her speaking, I think, in the last week or so. Oh, here she is last year. "The term white privilege is careless and divisive." So hang on a minute, that can't be the same person, can it? One person saying anyone using the word divisive to describe a different viewpoint has to stop, and there she is using the word divisive to describe a different viewpoint. It's a bloody good job she never puts her foot in her mouth and has to apologise for making gaffes, isn't it? It's probably a consequence of her working class upbringing in McDonald's.
James O'Brien on LBC.
7 minutes after 11 is the time, and we come to another question. I've got to stop saying it's a question I never ask you, and then I ask you about once a week. A variation upon the theme of how big a deal is this? How significant is this? I speak of the announcement yesterday that Facebook, in fact the whole of Meta, which is the parent company of Facebook, will follow the lead of Twitter and get rid of fact-checking to, quotes, restore free expression, end quotes. There was a little indicator of this ludicrous conceit, wasn't there, from Farage the other day when he claimed that Elon Musk had brought free speech back to Twitter, and you found yourself thinking, what does he mean by that? Speech was free. The only people who got penalised on Twitter before Elon Musk came back were the liars and the kind of people that incited the race riots, the Farage riots in the summer. What does free speech mean? Free to do what Andrew Tate did and disseminate complete nonsense, which was, of course, picked up by people like Nigel Farage. The idea, another element of the news today which plays into this hideously dishonest narrative is this 2-tier claim. If you are persuaded that there is anything remotely rum about people being sent to jail for what they have posted on social media, just imagine those words coming out of a loud hailer at the bottom of your garden path or on the pavement outside your house. So just imagine that the people providing addresses of, for example, mosques or hotels containing asylum seekers and encouraging people to go and attack them or burn them to the ground, just imagine that it was your address that they were sharing, the address of the home with your children in it, or the address of the building where your parents are working. So I find myself torn between thinking that people are so bombarded with vile bigotry that they truly can't see the wood for the trees. And then, of course, you have the problem of people in my profession, in the media, who I think do know the truth, but think that it is more professionally advantageous to pretend that they don't understand. So it's the Telegraph today talking about two-tier justice because some rioters are being released while a woman who made threats to kill is not. And what's his chops? Musk has tried to do is create this idea, and I think Farage was joining in on Monday, to create the idea that because it's only on social media, it shouldn't be taken seriously. I think we all fell into that trap 20 years ago or 10 years ago. But if you're in it now, I'm afraid I don't believe you're acting in good faith. Just imagine if you've got a problem with this, if you truly think there is a two-tier system, imagine that the person encouraging murderous attacks upon a specific building was doing it with a loudhailer in your street. And this is the crucial point with regard to the Farage riots, with a mob of people already assembled and baying for the blood of you and your family, or people like you. Because if you posted some of this stuff in the middle of an entirely peaceful period, it wouldn't carry the criminal context that it carries when you post it in the midst of the actual riots. So if you truly have a problem with it, and if you want to share this with people who do what I do for a living, then do feel free. Then just imagine it was your family that people were encouraging others to kill, while providing details in many cases of where they are and even perhaps what they look like. And if you're still a little bit too antediluvian or a little bit too old and decrepit to understand the power of social media, then imagine they were doing it with a loudhailer at the front of a mob baying for the blood of people like you. And then perhaps you'll understand why the ludicrous lines from places like the Telegraph today about two-tier justice because a woman who made threats to kill, very specific threats to kill, remains in jail as a consequence of making very specific threats to kill. I suppose in order to prove that there was two-tier justice in the context that these clowns want you to believe, then you'd need to provide me with the evidence of somebody else doing exactly the same things in exactly the same way, but not getting jailed because of some unidentified difference. It's incredible, right? Except it's not incredible because it's all part of the same narrative. It's all part of the narrative of lies and division. And that is why, and here's an interesting message. So you think you should be the arbiter of what is true and what is false? I say, no, I don't. I think objectivity should be. You know, if someone says it's raining and someone says it's not, the job of a journalist used to be to stick their head out of the window and see whether it got wet. In recent years, and these are historical cycles that come and go, they ebb and flow, but in recent years, the opposite has become the case. The British media is full of people who insist that it's raining, even as you show them evidence that it's not. From the comment pages of the Daily Telegraph right through to the guests on the BBC. There are people paid handsome sums of money to insist that black is white, that climate change is not something that human beings have contributed to, that Brexit would make you rich or that it's gone well. These are objective untruths. These are demonstrable nonsenses. Or indeed, if we return to the conversation of the first hour, the idea that the callers we spoke to, the young professionals, the doctors, the recruitment consultants, are somehow part of the same problem of the grooming gangs. These are obvious lies that would once have got you removed from Twitter. Before Elon Musk bought it, of course, Stephen Yaxley-Lennon had been removed from Twitter. People spreading racist propaganda had been removed from Twitter. So when he brought them back, here's a question. If Elon Musk had not bought Twitter, would the Farage riots have happened this summer? I don't think they would. I was still engaged with the platform at the time, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Still can't, actually. Or indeed the speed with which people have moved to defend the criminals, all of whom, of course, pleaded guilty. But hey-ho, you don't need to understand things to have strong opinions, especially not on social media. If Elon Musk hadn't bought Twitter, would the Farage riots have happened this summer? Well, people like Andrew Tate wouldn't have been on there, would they? So, and it was on Andrew Tate that I think Farage relied for his information, the man currently facing all sorts of charges in Romania and in this country. Also a man who's probably worth talking to on medieval attitudes to women now, I come to think of it. But I don't imagine Robert Jenrick was referring to him, or indeed I don't imagine Farage is referring to him, having described Andrew Tate as someone who appeals in a similar way to the population that he does. But if he hadn't bought Twitter, do you think it would have happened? I don't know that that's a phoning, because I don't know there's anything to say beyond yes or no. But I don't. And what Mark Zuckerberg, the owner of Facebook, has done, in a way that I think explains why Nick Clegg left the company last week. Mark Zuckerberg has watched the riots happen, watched the role that Twitter played in those riots, the post-Musk role, or the role that post-Musk Twitter played, and he has thought, Facebook needs to be more like that. So he's watched the riots, he's watched the election of Donald Trump, of course, which has been carried over the line on a farrago of lies and exaggerations. And he has decided that Facebook needs to be more like that. So I am going to ask you how worried we should be. Fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they have created. Now, if you were to knit together the two conversations that we've had today, you could come up with a fairly compelling conclusion. By politically biased, social media has historically not encouraged people to pretend that all British Pakistani Muslims are a problem. Now, Robert Jenrick, following Elon Musk's lead, has gone public with his contention that everybody of a certain background is a problem, regardless of proof, regardless of evidence, regardless of the echoes of 1930s Germany that this kind of rhetoric inarguably and irrefutably contains. And Mark Zuckerberg has decided to get rid of fact checkers. He's also decided it will, and I quote, get rid of a bunch of restrictions. And he has admitted that it means more of, in his words, the bad stuff will get through. Here's an extraordinary thing. If you think about the world of pogroms and holocausts, the man who has replaced Nick Clegg said, instead of going to some so-called expert, it instead relies on the community and the people on the platform to provide their own commentary to something that they've read. In other words, explicitly stating that you can decide for yourself, regardless of evidence, what is true or not. Because what you need to do to understand what is happening here is replace the word expert with the word evidence. And you're back to Kellyanne Conway and alternative facts. Instead of going to some so-called evidence, Mr. Kaplan said, except he didn't, he said experts. It instead relies on the community and the people on the platform to provide their own commentary to something that they've read. So if, for example, you wanted to challenge what Robert Jenrick has said about completely and wholly innocent British Muslims by pointing out that it is hideously wrong, statistically, morally, measurably, if enough people on the social media platform piled in to say, no, I agree with him, it becomes true. That's what's happening here. It is only 3 years ago that Donald Trump was suspended from Facebook as a consequence of all of the lies that he disseminated regarding the last presidential election and the consequent coup attempt that was incited by him. Again, important not to forget that supporters of Donald Trump are supporters of violent coups. I suppose they could defend themselves by claiming, no, we only support the ones that fail. We don't support the ones that succeed. But that seems to me to be an exercise in hair splitting. So fact checkers are gone, which of course means facts are gone. You can't have facts without fact checkers. Community notes are largely, not largely, but are grossly inadequate in comparison to actual evidence-based fact checking. What you've got here is Mark Zuckerberg announcing that if somebody says it's raining on Facebook, then rather than getting anybody to stick their head out the window and see whether or not it gets wet, you'll just count the number of people who say that it is, compare it with the number of people who say that it isn't, and conclude that the truth lies in the majority. 273 people say it's raining, 271 say it's not. Spoiler alert, it's not raining. But on the new Facebook, it is. 2 questions, and you will need to know a little bit more about some of these issues than I do to answer them in part. Why is he doing this? 0345 6060 973, and what does it mean? What does it mean? Will Guyot, the technology expert who routinely contributes to LBC, told me yesterday this was in many ways the worst day of his career. We should perhaps talk to him about why, but I want to hear from you. Why is Mark Zuckerberg doing this? 0345 6060 973. And what will it mean? It's 11:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the fact-checking question has gone in precisely the opposite direction from the direction which anybody honest would want it to go. How many times have I sat here and said to you that I wish they'd do it on question time? I judged some student radio awards years ago, and the station to which I think I gave the award were live fact-checking on air in the studio. I tried to do it here, of course. That's why some people get so cross with me. But they would have somebody, and you think about the speed of the internet. You just sit there with a laptop in the corner of the Question Time studio. A politician says something, and you check it. I know what you're thinking. A really good presenter should probably be able to do that anyway, certainly with the benefit of an earpiece. But that's a little unfair, you know. You could have some help, or you could come back to it halfway through the programme and you could just say, well, a moment ago, so-and-so said this and that is demonstrably untrue, or so-and-so said that and the statistics do not support it. Farage would be finished in a fortnight. Of course he would. If you want to see him being fact-checked, I think the footage of me interviewing him 10 years ago is still relatively popular online, but they don't do it. And you live with that. And you know that an awful lot of the nonsense that people believe has been culled from social media. Carol Cadwallader's work in the aftermath of Brexit, when she was just fascinated by how people in Port Talbot, where she grew up, could have been persuaded that leaving the European Union would make them better off, when, as we know, the polar opposite is true, has been proven to be true. The work she did digging into the role that Facebook played, Cambridge Analytica, Dominic Cummings. And now the owner of Facebook has decided to make it even more of a Wild West, even less regulated. I said we should speak to Will Guyot, and lo and behold, up he pops. Why did you describe yesterday as the worst day of your career, Will?
James, what the hell is happening in the world?
That's my job. That's my job. You're here to answer the questions.
Right. One of the shadow ministers just an hour ago this morning, or a couple of hours ago, said that Elon Musk buying X has saved humanity.
Yes. I think that was Andrew Griffith, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think the nurse has been summoned.
So, what was so bad about yesterday? Meta had actually done a fairly good job at staying out of politics and at trying to police its platform. It had done a fairly good job. It had tried to stay as neutral as possible. You could demonstrate that it wasn't favoritizing left over right. You could independently prove that. Yeah. This all goes out the window now. This is the end of facts on the internet. This is the end of reality. And for Mark Zuckerberg to sit there in a $900,000 watch telling his audience that this is going to make the platform better, I don't know what he's smoking.
Does a $900,000 watch tell the same time as my watch?
Yeah, but maybe in a couple more time zones than yours.
Okay.
But
you must have theories on what he's up to. So, I mean, in terms of regulation and European moves to make people like Zuckerberg, and I think very pertinently in the current conversation, Elon Musk, ensure that their platforms cannot do harm. They don't like that kind of regulation.
No, one of two things has happened here. Either Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago has shown Mark Zuckerberg some holiday photos that he doesn't want on the internet, or he has said categorically, I will protect your business from international interference. And that is what I think has happened. And I think we're going to end up in or the EU specifically, will end up in a trade war with the US over social media.
And what will it mean for the ordinary user? I've mentioned Carol Cadwallader's investigations into how people in her native Welsh town could have been persuaded that leaving the European Union would somehow make them wealthier, and her investigations led her to Facebook and lies being posted there. So although you say the fact-checking was effective, it wasn't that effective, and now it's going to get worse.
No, the fact-checking was effective after that point that you talked about. The fact-checking has been fairly good through the US election, much to Trump's annoyance, because it was the platform that wasn't promoting him. It was the platform that wasn't actually promoting any political side, which was quite sensible at that point, as far as I could see. And we find ourselves in a situation where both Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are now proclaiming that community notes are an effective way of stopping misinformation on the internet. Have you seen the amount of community notes that get attached to the tripe that Elon Musk posts on X?
Yes.
It just does not work.
Well, I mean, it is Elon Musk saying it's raining, and then 100 people, including the world's finest meteorologist, saying no, it isn't. But it's had 17 million shares and likes or views or whatever it may be, and the truth hasn't got its trousers on. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes. And I know we're short of time, so there's one thing I want to say.
No, we're not short of time when you're speaking from a position of expertise.
Anybody who tells you a social network platform is a free speech platform does not know what the hell they are talking about.
Why do you say that?
Because there's somebody somewhere pulling a lever as to how many people view what is said and what is liked.
So when Nigel Farage praises Elon Musk for bringing back free speech to X, what he means is for massively prioritising people like me.
Yes, exactly. 100%. It is not, there's no such thing as free speech on the internet, because even with Meta, who have free speech on social media, because Meta, who have largely managed independence, is still going to be biased slightly one way or another. It's going to be taking guesses. It's going to be taking assumptions. But for those who call X a free speech platform, they need to go and give their head a shake in the street. It is not a free speech platform. It never has been. It never will be. And for those people going, you're just a lefty guy. You just don't like what we've got a place to speak now. You're too woke. It's not that at all. It's not an independent platform. It does not promote free speech.
Well, it's doing Donald Trump's bidding, and no doubt Vladimir Putin would be delighted. So the idea that it is politically impartial becomes ridiculous. And just 3 years after, they suspended Trump from the platform entirely for saying precisely the sort of things that any half-decent fact-checker would have picked up as blatant lies.
Yeah, no, we are completely there.
Is Meta more of a problem than X? I mean, is this bigger news than Musk buying Twitter in a way?
Because X means nothing. If you look at we speak, well, not us on LBC, because we're getting very reasonable about talking about how ridiculous Musk is, despite the fact Elon Musk's dad keeps turning up in places.
Yes.
The platform itself, X, is tiny. It's not even in the top 10.
Really?
If you consider the audience. Yeah, it's like you've got Facebook, everything is bigger than X. It's lower down the list, despite Elon Musk telling you it's the most important news platform in the world. It's not that important.
Someone should tell the Tory party.
Well, yeah, they should. But Meta is by far more important. It's got billions of people on WhatsApp. It's got billions of people on Instagram. And it's got billions of people on Facebook, regardless of the narrative where people keep saying, Facebook's for old people. The reality is the number of people leaving the platform is not growing massively. The platform still has billions of users.
The people that were previously doing the fact-checking are organisations like Reuters and the AFP and Full Fact in this country. I've been people whose impartiality is absolutely beyond question. So what replaces that? I mean, could somebody go on there and say that Will Geyer is a lizard? Or something. I don't want to. I could say something hideous at this point, Will, or I could use myself as an example. Something vicious, libelous, insightful, criminal. The kind of thing that we presume the person arrested for making threats to Jess Phillips has been doing. That I mean, truly hideous incitement. And Facebook would just wash its hands, or will there still be a line that can't be crossed?
I hope there is still a line that can't be crossed. And let's finish by saying this first applies in the US.
Yes, of course. We should be clear about that. It won't apply here initially, although it's hard to see how that works logistically.
No, and it's hard to see that it not becoming something over here, given that Mark Zuckerberg, in his rambling 5-minute address on the platform yesterday, said Trump was dedicated to helping support tech companies, US-based tech companies, from international oversight.
Yeah. And that's the point, in that if we wanted to say, hang on a minute, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, your platforms are promoting images of child sexual abuse, or there is evidence here that you are facilitating the grooming of young girls. Could you please stop that, please? They want to say it's not our job to stop that. We shouldn't be regulating.
Yeah, they're edging further. Nick Clegg, if Nick Clegg did one thing right, as far as I'm concerned, was accountability for what was posted on the platform and dialogue with the people who could do more to clean platforms up. I hope Joel Kaplan continues that, but based on what Mark Zuckerberg said yesterday, it was the saddest day in my 20-year career. We might as well shut up the doors.
Because it ceases to be in any way a trusted source. I mean, you can tailor your algorithms, not your algorithms, your options, can't you, in your settings to make sure that you don't see it. But that's a little bit like locking your door while there's a riot raging outside. Yeah,
you cannot stop Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk pulling the lever in whichever direction they fancy in what you are now going to see.
Wow.
They hadn't been doing that for a while.
And that is, of course, what happened on X. Although, as you remind us, it's negligible in I think 600 million compared to 3 billion. So your point was absolutely correct. I didn't realise that, to my embarrassment. Final question: why are they moving the kind of remaining elements of safety provision from California to Texas?
Looser law.
Are you serious? Is that simple?
Yes, simple, looser law, probably some tax benefits as well.
So the trust and safety teams move from California to Texas because the laws in Texas will be more
favourable
to owners that want to avoid all form of regulation and take no responsibility whatsoever for what we or our children see on these sites.
Correct.
Up with free speech. Final question: should we get off these platforms? I quite like Facebook. I still like it. It's the only way I keep in touch with old school friends. Should I come off it?
No, I'm still staying on all of them. I particularly enjoy X for triggering absolute lunatics who suggest I've become some sort of lefty mouthpiece, whereas I'm just saying what I've always said, that none of these platforms exist on free speech. It's always been my thing. And stay everywhere. Be part of the conversation, not part of the problem.
Easier said than done, Will, but thank you, as always. 11:33, Will Guy, LBC's technology expert. How do you want to talk about this? Remember, we've got PMQs coming up at 12, which could be a doozy. We'll double-check. A lot of love coming in for you, Will. I hope you're still listening. I suppose, look at the damage that Facebook has already done to people in the context of misinformation and lies, the stuff that your mum believes, and now they're going to take away the fact-checking. God only knows where we're going to end up. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:37. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'll read you two texts. Actually, I'll do that in a minute because Jason's on the line from the Bay of Kotor, no less, in Montenegro. Jason, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Really interesting to hear you talking about this subject, because I chaired a meeting about 2 weeks ago, just before Christmas.
Yeah.
It was a Pan-Balkan meeting from different countries in the region, members of parliament and opposition members and so on. And we were talking about this very issue. Not apropos Facebook, but apropos social media in general.
Okay.
Because people where I live believe that things like democracy or freedom of speech are absolute.
Yes.
And they don't recognise that democracy doesn't end with an election. That's just the first foundation of a democracy, and democracy is what happens, how leaders behave after an election. Same thing about freedom of speech. They think it's absolute, and therefore you have the right to say anything. And in fact, this conversation we had about freedom of speech came about because Edi Rama, Prime Minister of Albania,
right,
has banned TikTok for 1 year.
Do you know, an Albanian friend of mine told me that yesterday, and I'd missed it completely. I'd missed the story completely.
Yeah, it's because a 14-year-old was stabbed to death, and it apparently came about because of arguments that we're having over TikTok and so on and so on. And so people at this meeting were saying, some people were saying that it was wrong that Rama did this and freedom of speech. The arguments that I'm hearing some people in the UK have now apropos the position of Facebook.
Yes.
But what people don't realise is that freedom of speech only works if you have other laws protecting people from hate speech or from incitement to hate or whatever. And I think that this is all about populism, whether it's left or right, because populism only survives when it's supported by false equivalence.
Well, when the lies go unchallenged, when you are not being hauled up over for saying things that aren't true. It's what the whole project has always relied on, always, throughout history.
That's right. That's right. The answer is always, well, that's my opinion and I'm entitled to it.
Yes.
You know, like saying the world is flat. It's an indisputable fact that the world is not flat. And, if you look at other areas of social media, which I'm on, and by the way, I'm very happy you didn't mention my institute, which I gave to your colleague, and my surname.
You clearly know what you're talking about, but you want to protect your professional...
Yeah, of course I do. Of course. And but I think that, what's happening in the UK, it's a little more sophisticated than where I'm living now. Okay. But it's exactly the same narrative, and the narrative being projected by all areas of social media is to maintain a narrative of insecurity apropos reality, where opinions are seen as equal to facts. Because when you start really discussing facts, you're into the area of political discourse, which is how you grew up and how I grew up and how we were educated. And that doesn't work for populism.
I often use the analogy of a football pitch in the sense that you might be passionately opposed to the other team, but you all agree on what the offside rule is and you all respect the referee's whistle. And this is the removal. This is the removal of the referee.
Well, it's the removal of the rules of the game, period. And so it's very, very difficult to fight the populism, whether it's coming from the left or right, is almost insignificant.
Yes, of course.
It's all about false equivalence. As you rightly pointed out, a journalist's job, when being told by somebody it's raining and somebody else that it's not, is to stick their head out the window and then call out the liar. But we don't do that. And now, if you look at the elections in the US, it's evident that without support of social media, it's very, very difficult to win an election. Most people don't get their news from areas that you and I might. I'm still on X and I'm still on other networks, but like most serious people, I've moved. I've moved over to Blue Sky. Same. Because in Blue Sky, we, the users, control the algorithms
for now, and you can disagree with each other on there, but you can't claim that black is white or that up is down, and then crucially marshal 10,000 other accounts to come in and attack the person who keeps insisting that up is up. Listening to you, Jason, for the first time in this conversation, I'm detecting an air almost of inevitability in the context of Trump's victory in the election, because if a man who lied and lied and lied again about the result of the last election, the battle with Joe Biden, a man who is desperate to pretend that he is not a multiple felon, who wants to remove investigations into himself from the courts. I mean, he needs the truth to become diluted, to become negotiable, because more than perhaps any politician in living memory, he thrives on people believing things that aren't true.
Well, I think that's true everywhere. I mean, if I look in the area where I live, and the problems with Kosovo, I'm sure you probably are aware of the problems with Montenegro at the moment being hollowed out. But okay.
Oddly, I am, but only because of my friend Tony.
Okay. If I'm posting something on Facebook which is I won't say provocative in the sense of lying or being antagonistic, but actually a matter of fact, apropos Vucic.
Yeah.
That piece is deleted.
Why?
And you know why? Because the headquarters of Meta in the Western Balkans is Belgrade.
Right.
Now, most of the people working at Meta in Belgrade are not Americans or Brits. They're Serbs.
And they will they will operate in support of their own politics.
Absolutely. So you will find very antagonistic posts apropos in support of Vucic, which are remaining online. But if somebody writes something, however intellectual or analytical, opposing, it will get bumped off.
It will disappear. Can I lead you, and by all means refuse to come with me, into some slightly theoretical territory?
Of course.
I'm wondering if Facebook had existed, for example, in 1930s Germany, whether or not what we're seeing now, both there and on X, would mean that the platform owners had no responsibility to remove Nazi propaganda or to challenge anti-Semitic tropes.
I think that's really interesting because I actually, in chairing this meeting, I brought up the point that if people present at the meeting think that democracy is about elections, then how can they be anti-Vucic, or how could they then say that Hitler didn't have the right to do what he did?
Precisely.
Because he was elected.
Yes.
Right? And so, democracy doesn't end with an election. That's where it begins.
And so this is a deeply troubling moment, then?
Incredibly so. I would say we're not in a 1939 moment. I think we're much more in a 1936 moment.
Yes.
And I think that Ukraine is the equivalent of Spain.
Except that we've now got these engines of mass disinformation that are already dangerous and are now being turbocharged.
Absolutely correct. And not only that, but you don't have to go out of your way to be fed it, because everybody has got a smartphone in their pocket. And so the propaganda is omnipresent.
Is there anything we can do about it? I mean, apart from opt out, which of course is difficult because it's proven to be addictive.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the old, maxim when you and I'm a bit old, 15 years older than you, but it's still, it was the same for us, is, educate, agitate, and organize. But it's harder and harder to do that because one is, submitted to being bumped off any platform where you're trying to educate or agitate. And no one is going to turn up to an in-person meeting in the Western Balkans, for example.
Wow.
So the only forums you have pretty much are online. I mean, there are occasional forums like the 2BS, To Be Secure,
yes,
which is annually held in Montenegro, and it's very, very good. And you have people like the Deputy General Secretary of NATO and ambassadors there and, EU commissioners there. And, for 3 or 4 days you have really, really interesting and very important inputs. But then as soon as you walk away from that and try to disseminate that across any platforms, it becomes very, very problematic.
Apropos that angle, and final question, how much of this is relevant to the EU attempts to push back against regulation, what we could call regulation resistance? So we know that, we know what's happened publicly, so behind the scenes there'll be a lot more happening, and you sound like someone who might know a bit about that. How big a battle is on the horizon? I mean, if European countries decide to challenge what Trump and his acolytes Musk and Zuckerberg are doing here, what happens?
If you'd asked me that before the European elections, I would have had a different answer for you.
Wow.
But now we have a new commissioner for regional enlargement. We have a replacement of Joseph Borrell as the security commissioner. We have Poland taking on the presidency. So I'm a little bit more hopeful than I would have been if those elections and changes hadn't happened.
Gosh.
But I'm not holding my breath.
But it's a big fight, potentially. It's
a very big fight. And the NGOs, certainly in this region and probably elsewhere, are dominated by, at the very least, the centre-right of politics. And it makes it very problematic.
I'm glad you were listening today.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
I listen as often as I can.
Well, I take that as an enormous compliment.
Keep up the good work. Keep up the good work, James. You're one of the few that really speak truth to power, regardless of consequence, and I respect that greatly.
Well, I'm very flattered that you say that. Thank you. I take that as a big compliment, Jason. Thank you. 11:49 is the time. Although Stuart would take a different view. He writes, "Your world is falling apart." What if they're both right? What if Jason's right with his very warm words, but Stuart's also right as well? I presume Stuart's delighted that speaking truth to power, or a world in which facts matter, could be falling apart. What if they're both right?
James O'Brien on LBC.
You've got to find the levity somewhere, haven't you? But I wonder how Mark Zuckerberg's decision to get rid of fact checkers is going to cope with some of the mischief makers on Facebook now, making all sorts of, some grim allegations, but some hilarious allegations, including a claim that he's the recipient of the world's first rat penis transplant. I don't know. You see, he's created a world in which all of these become almost equally valid. Steve's been in touch. So these times are like 1930s Germany. I thought Jason's point about 1936 as opposed to 1939 was both historically very, very literate and simultaneously terrifying. And going back to Stuart, just only one or two other people today who probably have tuned into the wrong programme celebrating what's being described. The end of truth, the end of fact-checking, the end of objectivity. Listen, I know it's a big ask, but read a history book, lads. I mean, if you're literally saying, the truth won't matter anymore, we'll be able to say whatever we want, and you think that's a good thing, I would cautiously suggest you read a history book, or maybe just get an audio book. Just what happens when governments, in this case Donald Trump's, enlist the disseminators of information and corrupt them, or encourage the disseminators of, quotes, information, end quotes, to corrupt themselves. It never ends well for anybody. But, on your crack. Here is a quick heads up, because PMQs is on the way. I'm just checking the clock. I just can't quite believe the time. Where's all the time gone today? It's calls like Jason's, isn't it? I talked to Jason for 2 hours. Quite happily, but I didn't. Natasha will join us shortly for PMQs. After PMQs, I want to have a look at the Tulip Sadiq story, which I think a normal, respectable Conservative party that wasn't engaging in the rhetoric of 1930s Germany would be all over, and it would indeed, I think, be quite difficult for the Labour Party. If you're not aware of what that story is, then stay tuned. Henry Riley will bring you up to speed shortly. But before that, we will meet Dr. Victoria Rose. A few of you, I think, have rightly wondered why the carnage in Gaza has sort of disappeared from the news agenda. I can speak both personally and more broadly. I think it's impossible for a lot of the media outlets who were defending everything Israel did to continue to report on what Israel is doing because they can't defend it anymore. I think that's been true for a very, very long time. It's no comfort, solace whatsoever to the people in Gaza still being terrorised and killed, but we can return to the story, and I thought that Victoria would be a wonderful person with whom to do it, because she is a consultant plastic surgeon who works out of Guy's and St Thomas's and Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in this country, but who has been to Gaza 4 times, twice since the October the 7th terrorist attack, and she intends to return next month, and she can give us an idea about both the work that she does and the situation on the ground in a corner of the world that many people could be forgiven for thinking seems to have been forgotten, particularly by outlets and individuals who couldn't stop talking about it a year or so ago. 11:56 is the time. Natasha Clark is with us. I thought PMQs might not be on this week. I couldn't remember whether they'd gone back or not, but back they have gone.
Back with a bang. I think it's going to be a really messy Prime Minister's Questions today. Speaking to people today in Westminster, it just seems so much anger around this grooming scandal on both the Labour and the Conservative side, and I think it's going to get a bit mudslingy.
Well, it's not very edifying for the public because, once again, albeit that the subject matter is much more emotive than on previous occasions, but the Tories had 14 years to do any of the things that they're going to insist that Labour should have done.
They did, and, arguably, if they did go and announce another national inquiry into this, doesn't it just play into the hands of Elon Musk?
Yes.
Because he's the entire reason all of Westminster has spent days talking about this issue in the first place.
And yet, Will Guyer reminded us earlier that in the great scheme of social media platforms, X isn't even that big a deal, but politicians, of course, love it. Politicians are plugged into it, as indeed are journalists, although in my case, not so much anymore, all the time. They think it's a reflection of public opinion. And Elon Musk, of course, has successfully manipulated the thing in which they think they can see a reflection of public opinion.
An MP was saying to me earlier, do you think if all government departments and all MPs got off Twitter, we'd not be talking about Elon Musk quite so much, which I thought was quite an interesting suggestion. I think probably not. I don't think...
Not as much?
No, probably not. But I think his proximity to Donald Trump is why we are mostly talking about Elon Musk. I don't particularly know if it's all about the social media side.
And in the case of Robert Jenrick, the belief that Elon Musk can be a kingmaker.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So the closer you get to Elon Musk, the more likely you are to get his support in any future election, and the more crucial that support could prove to be.
Potentially, and what you've been talking about this morning with Mark Zuckerberg, and the sort of realignment of the social media sphere in reaction to Donald Trump's victory, and whether that's the right or wrong thing to do in order to be awaken up to this new political reality that we're facing.
So Badenoch says, we demand an inquiry. Starmer says we've already had 7, including a national one, the leader of which says we don't need another one. The journalist who broke the story in 2012 says we don't need another one, and praised me, Keir Starmer, to the rooftops for being the single most significant figure in the pursuit of these criminals. And that's the bit that's missing from the narrative. Keir Starmer is admired and revered by people who work in this sphere for the work that he did at the DPP. The Tories have had 14 years to do all of the things they're demanding that he should do, pretending that they don't know that 7 inquiries have already taken place, will nonetheless, under this cynical Badenochian iteration of their party, will nonetheless pretend that black is white, up is down, and that it's all Keir Starmer's fault.
And it is
I don't know how he responds to that, to be honest with you.
With anger, I think, today. Yes. I think, you saw a little bit of a flavour of that on his NHS speech on Monday. He really, really let rip at those people that think that he's not done enough on this issue, saying that he was the one that reopened those cases.
More than any other politician in the world, arguably. Certainly, it's a British problem, this, but he's done more than any other politician by dint of the job that he had before he was a politician.
Yeah, and look, the issue of public inquiries we can get into, it does cost a lot of money. They do take a long time. On the other hand, the Times newspaper has done a lot to expose this scandal. Like I say, you spoke to the journalist. The Times newspaper does want to see another inquiry opened. They think that...
But Andrew Norfolk doesn't.
Yeah, it is an issue.
It's almost as if one of them is motivated by the facts and one of them is motivated by politics.
Sure, potentially. But... I think the argument is it hasn't looked at this issue in enough detail. That's the argument that Kemi Badenoch is probably going to make at Prime Minister's questions, that it wasn't specifically
when did she discover that?
on grooming. There's questions for her to answer, of course.
I think Keir Starmer's not allowed to ask questions.
No, he will anyway.
I know he will. We will cross live to the House of Commons. Now, the treatment, I tell you what, as a veteran Westminster watcher, well, you're not a veteran, but you've been doing it for a while. Are you surprised that no one's come to Jess Phillips's support from the opposition benches except Ed Davey?
Yeah, I am actually. I just thought this was going to be a very easy issue. And I was struck by Chris Philp speaking to Lewis Goodall on Sunday and about how he just could not seem to bring himself to completely just defend her. And I actually thought Chris Philp usually is quite good at sort of leaning into that from the opposition perspective. Yeah, I don't know why that is. I don't know why it seems to be so unable for so many politicians to be able to condemn. And usually, I think, the right of British politics usually not bad at coming to the defence of the left in terms of things like this. So I don't know why they haven't been able to do so.
Forgive me. This is why he talks about the line. It's what we're alluding to, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what he said. He said the line has been now been crossed.
We thought everybody agreed where the line was.
Yeah.
Elon Musk jumps over it. And every single Tory MP, we've been in touch with Theresa May just for clicks and giggles. She hasn't responded. She hasn't provided us. Every single Tory parliamentarian, past or present, has remained silent while Elon Musk describes their colleague as a genocide rape apologist.
It's not acceptable and should be completely called out. And I don't quite understand why the Conservatives see this as such a partisan issue that they cannot do so. We've spoken about threats to MPs, and we know my colleague Aggie Chambray was reporting on this earlier this week, how Jess Phillips has faced even more threats since Elon Musk has decided to go all in for her online. And it's just a matter of time before we see something horrific happen again in British politics, isn't it, if we continue on this way?
Please, God, no. But, the question of who will be to blame if, God forbid, it does, is going to be quite easy to answer, I think, just as the provocations and incitements online that led to the riots in the summer were fairly clearly trackable back to various well-established sources. Fear of Musk, perhaps, is the only thing you could say. If we take that generic idea that this guy could get me into Downing Street, then why would any Tory MP invite his attack? Anyway, here is Kemi Badenoch, the leader of His Majesty's opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House has heard that the Prime Minister lost his brother during the Christmas period. So can I offer him, on behalf of my party, our sincerest condolences? Yeah. The new year has started with a focus on the decades-long rape gang scandal. Across the country, thousands of girls were tortured and sexually abused at the hands of men who treated them as things to be used and disposed of, destroying many lives forever. The Prime Minister has mentioned previous inquiries. He is right. There has been an inquiry into child sexual abuse, but it wasn't about the rape gang scandal. In its 468 pages, it mentioned Rotherham just once. Is the Prime Minister confident that we know the full extent of rape gang activity?
Prime Minister.
Can I first thank her for her condolences, and can I thank her for reaching out over the Christmas period when I lost my brother? I really did appreciate that, and I appreciate it today. Mr. Speaker, on the question of a further inquiry, there have been a number of inquiries. Some of them localised, including the Mayor of Manchester's inquiry recently, and of course a national inquiry Professor Jay carried out, took 7 years, had 20 recommendations, none of which actually were implemented by the party opposite when they were in government. Now, this is a really serious issue. We must focus, obviously, on the victims and survivors. There's no fixed view on the victims and survivors about a further national inquiry. There are mixed views. But there is a view, and I share this view, that what is needed now is action on what we already know. We already know, myself from personal knowledge when I was Chief Prosecutor, that warped ideas, myths and stereotypes about victims were at the heart of this. We've known that for a decade. Yeah. The Jay report called for mandatory reporting. I called for it 11 years ago. Yeah. What we need now is action. What can't be tolerated is the idea that this afternoon members opposite will vote down a bill which protects children, include Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me just. One of the provisions in the bill is to protect children vulnerable today who are out of school, to prevent abusers ever taking those children out of school. I implore members opposite to defy the misleading leadership of the Leader of the Opposition and vote for a really important bill.
Mr. Speaker, I'm shocked that the Prime Minister would say that actions were not taken. He knows full well that we accepted 18 of the 20 recommendations in the Jay inquiry and went further, launching a gangs task force that found 550 more perpetrators. That shows that there is still work to be done. In Rotherham alone, there have been over 1,400 victims. Across Oldham, Bradford, Bristol, Rochdale, and dozens more towns, there have been thousands more victims. But no one has joined the dots. No one has the total picture. And it is almost certainly still going on. One victim from Telford, and I know he says that victims have different views. We have different views across this House. But one victim from Telford says she wants a national inquiry because it will hold people accountable in a way that previous inquiries have not. It is very possible to have actions, take on more, and still have a national inquiry. So why won't he listen to victims and launch a national inquiry which would have the power to summon witnesses and make them give evidence under oath?
Mr. Speaker, she says they accepted the recommendations. They didn't act on them. Exactly. One of the central recommendations was mandatory reporting, and it still hasn't been enacted. I called for this 11 years ago. They've been tweeting and talking. We've been acting. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has been an MP, I think, for 8 years. Her party have been in government for 7.5 of those 8 years. She was the Children's Minister. She was the Women's and Equalities Minister. I can't recall her once raising this issue in the House, once calling for a national inquiry. It's only in recent days she's jumped on the bandwagon. Now, Mr. Speaker, in fairness, if I'm wrong about that, and she has raised it, then I invite her to say that now, and I will happily withdraw the remark that she hasn't raised it in this House in the 8 years that she's been here until today.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is being very specific because I have raised this issue. I've raised it in speeches. I've raised it publicly. He knows that as a minister, I would not have been speaking on this specific issue. I was not a Home Office minister. But Mr. Speaker, I will remind him about other victims who came to me who I did help. The victims of the Tavistock scandal who came to me as a minister. I didn't send them away like his safeguarding minister. I made sure, as his Labour Party were calling me transphobic, that we launched the CAS review, which even his health secretary has accepted. So we do right by victims, Mr. Speaker. The reason why a national inquiry is important is because this issue is systemic. It has been involving local and national officials, the police, prosecutors, and politicians. He talks about some of the local inquiries, but these interlinked issues cannot be covered by local inquiries alone. In fact, the leaders of the Manchester inquiry resigned because they couldn't get evidence, they couldn't summon witnesses, and not a single person in a position of authority has been held to account. The Prime Minister called for 9 inquiries in the last Parliament. Does he not see that by resisting this one, people will start to worry about a cover-up?
Mr. Speaker, this is an important issue, and we have to focus on the victims and survivors, and it isn't helpful. This sort of lies and misinformation and slinging of mud doesn't help them one bit. Mr. Speaker, she raised a question of a victim with me, and quite right to, and I accept that victims and survivors are in different places on this. Those that I've spoken to are worried about the delay of a further inquiry. The last inquiry took 7 years. That would take us to 2031. Now, these inquiries, amongst the issues that's been raised with me, and if she's been speaking to victims, they'll have raised this with her, is that it's very hard for victims and survivors to come forward to explain what's happened to them. They do not want to be rushed through this process, which is why the last one took 7 years. It's not sensible to suggest that this can be done in a hurry, on the cheap, and comprehensively. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, that would take us to, let's say, 2030, 2031. The victims that I've spoken to want action today. I agree with them on that. But what I don't understand, I genuinely don't understand, is why anybody today would vote against the Children Wellbeing Bill, which will protect children who are vulnerable today. It will kill the bill. It will stop those provisions for children exposed at risk today. I implore them, vote for the bill. Don't wreck this in this misguided way.
Mr. Speaker, it is very possible to have shorter inquiries, especially if they are covering areas that have not been looked at yet. We don't need to repeat the work that has already been done. Let's look at new areas. Former Labour MP Anne Cryer said that there were councillors and MPs all over the country who knew what was going on but were terrified of being labelled racist. A national inquiry would ask if there was a racial or cultural motivation to some of these crimes where white girls were seen, as Jack Straw said, as easy meat. The member for Rotherham was sacked from Labour's front bench for speaking out about rape gangs. Does the Prime Minister now recognise that sacking people for telling the truth creates a chilling effect that means victims aren't listened to?
Well, I'm very happy to call out anybody who hasn't acted properly in these cases. I've done it many, many times before, and it doesn't matter to me which political party they're in. I'll call them out and I will condemn them. Mr. Speaker, when I was Chief Prosecutor, I took measures to confront this head-on. The first of the mass prosecutions for an Asian gang was in Rochdale. My team came to see me. It put a number of Asian men in the dock. They wanted the green light for the first of these cases to take place. I gave that green light, but on one condition, because it came to my attention that one of the men that was going into the dock had previously been arrested but not charged. And I said, you can bring the first of these mass prosecutions, but only if you look back at the file where we weren't charged and tell me what went wrong with a report so that I can start to put it right. And that's what started the reforms I brought about. So that's the approach I took in practice, whilst others were tweeting and talking. It's the approach I would take now in any case where there's wrongdoing here. But what we've got to do now, Professor Jay has said this, we have had a number of strong findings. There are 20 on the table from Professor Jay. We've got to get on with action. Don't block it this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, we need to focus on what this is really about. This is not about the Prime Minister's work in the CPS. And I would say very respectfully to the Prime Minister, it's not about you, it is about the victims. Be a leader, not a lawyer. We know that people were scared to tell the truth because they thought they would be called racist. If we want to stop this from ever happening again, we cannot be afraid. The Labour Party has adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia. That same APPG report said talking about sex groomers was an example of Islamophobia. This is exactly why people are scared to tell the truth. And the lack of clarity means that innocent British Muslims are smeared by association. That is not fair, and only a national inquiry can solve this. So will the Prime Minister look again at the Labour Party's adoption of the definition of Islamophobia, its chilling effect, and rule out introducing it in government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will call out any aspect that has prevented anybody coming forward or any case going forward when it comes to violence against women and girls, child abuse or child sexual exploitation, as I have been doing now for the best part of 15 years. But, yes, some people will say there should be a further inquiry. But that does, I accept that, but that means all the victims and survivors who are going to give evidence need to be in a position to do so. Not all of them are. I've been speaking to them. There are some that do think they are. It will take time. All of the institutions will have to give evidence. That will take time. This will delay things till 2031 also. But Mr. Speaker, we already know what the major flaws are. And my argument is we should get on with that action. And that's why we're bringing forward the bill this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has effectively told us that he's not able to do two things at the same time. This issue of a delay is a weak excuse. And I would say to him that by refusing this inquiry, he is enabling those people who wish to smear all British Muslims based on the actions of a small minority. He is talking about distraction tactics. Let us have the truth. The Prime Minister cannot tell the House the full scale of the scandal. He doesn't want questions asked of Labour politicians who may be complicit. He won't listen to the victims. He won't listen to the victims who are calling for a national inquiry. He is making this all about a bill this afternoon. Later today, he will tell Labour MPs, including in Telford, Rochdale, Bristol, Derby, Aylesbury, Oldham, Bradford, Peterborough, Coventry, Middlesbrough, Newcastle, Ramsgate, tell all of these people to vote against a national inquiry into the gangs which have systematically gang-raped children in their constituencies. This is one of the worst scandals in British history, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry? This is a very, very important issue that does matter to the country. It matters to all our constituents. I want to make sure they can hear what's being said by the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the worst scandals in recent British history. But how are they going to explain to their constituents that obeying his whip is more important than doing the right thing?
She's right to say it's one of the worst scandals. It's terrible. That's why I acted on it. Her recently acquired view that it's a scandal, having spent a lot of time on social media over Christmas, not once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said we can do two things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill, and protect children. There was Mr. Speaker, there was a dreadful case of Sarah Sharif that everybody will remember. This was the girl taken out of school and abused by an abuser. The bill this afternoon fixes that gap. And I know, I'm looking across, I know there are honourable members on the benches opposite who know very well that what's in this bill is necessary, that it's the right thing to do, and that would want to vote for this bill. I urge them to think twice about following this short-sighted, misguided, bandwagon-jumping approach of the non-leadership of the Leader of the Opposition. I urge them to.
Speaker, my constituent, Anne-Marie, and countless other armed forces families across Aldershot and Farnborough are living in shabby military accommodation that simply isn't good enough after 14 years of Conservative neglect. So can I welcome the Ministry of Defence plan to buy back thousands of homes in my constituency? And will the Prime Minister set out how sorting out this bad deal left behind by a past Tory government will make life better for Anne-Marie and others like her living in the home of the British Army?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for her question? And we all owe extraordinary debt of thanks to those who serve. Mr. Speaker, by reacquiring over 36,000 service family homes, including 1,700 in my honourable friend's constituency, we can rapidly transform substandard accommodation. The deal that we've done also saves the taxpayer around £230 million per year in rent, and of course it follows the largest pay rise for the armed forces in over 20 years. There is of course still work to do, but this is a major step forward.
We now come to the Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Red Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Happy New Year to you. And can I join others by offering my personal condolences to the Prime Minister on the loss of his brother? And can I take this opportunity to express my sadness at the passing of a much-loved member of the Liberal Democrat family, Baroness Jenny Randerson. Mr. Speaker, fixing the care crisis is urgent. For the millions of people, elderly and disabled, who are not getting the care they need, for the millions of family carers who are making huge sacrifices to fill the gap, for the NHS, where over 12,000 people are stuck in hospital beds because they can't get out of hospitals, the care's not there for them. The Prime Minister is right to say we need a cross-party approach today, but as Sir Andrew Dillot has said today, that needn't take 3 years. So will the Prime Minister please speed up this work so 2025 is the year we finally rise to the challenge of fixing care?
Prime Minister.
thank him for raising this important issue and thank him for his condolences. Yes, it is right we need to get this right. I want a cross-party consensus on this and invite him to work with us on this, as I know he will. But it is important, and he's right to say we need some action now as well. And that is why it's important I point out the immediate action that we've taken, the £3.7 billion of additional funding in the budget for social care, another £86 million to allow 7,800 more disabled and elderly people to live more independent lives, and of course the increased carers allowance. And the way in which we've set this up is in stages so that we can act and improve as we go along, but making sure that we've got consensus for the bigger changes that may be proposed in the review. And I do invite him and members across the House to work with us on this so that we can get this right and make sure that what we put in place endures beyond just a few years. Thank you.
Fred David.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid if the government doesn't bring in these long-term social care reforms this year, their NHS reforms, this Parliament will fail. So I hope he will revisit the timetable. But moving on, Mr. Speaker, while the Honourable Member for Clacton may miss out on his big allowance from Elon Musk, the spectre of the richest man in the world trying to buy a British political party should give us all pause for thought. And after years of the Conservatives taking millions in pounds of Russian money, will the Prime Minister now work with us to bring in long overdue reforms of party funding so that power in this country lies with the voters and not wealthy overseas oligarchs?
I think we all had a smile on Sunday when the honourable member said how cool it was to have the support of Musk, only for Musk to say he should be removed. Just a few hours later, that's the rough and tough of politics. And of course, we're looking at the question of funding more generally.
Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the efforts this Labour government has made to reset our relationship.
A little longer than
the
usual,
European
that, for
Union
reasons that we will explore with Natasha Clark after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
25 minutes after 12 is the time. Let's rattle through some of the messages and then turn to Natasha. What an absolute disgrace Badenoch is. All that talk of smearing British Muslims. Just how far away from Kemi Badenoch is Robert Jenrick currently sitting? She really is reprehensible, says Mike in Sutton. Finally, it's a shame that Badenoch has focused all of her questions in this space, given that she's had 14 years. They've had 14 years to review all of this, says John. I think she now comes back to her true red meat argument of the definition of Islamophobia. Starmer is right to be very angry in his closing remarks. Why is everyone banging on about this now, asks James. Is it just because of Musk? The Tories are a disgrace, says Matt. Why are willing flunkies trotting out the disruption the world's richest man wants off the backs of rape survivors? Very strong from Starmer, says Jason. Shameful from Badenoch. Let me try and find something positive. Here you go. Steve writes in Guildford, Starmer looks like a rabbit caught in headlights. Steve apparently watching television but texting a radio station. He writes, the opposition is slaughtering Starmer. And Badenoch disgusts me today, says Sarah. No reference to her fellow female politician, Jess Phillips, and such inflammatory talk about Muslims. Where does her bias come from? It's quite outrageous, and we British value our measured democracy. And another positive one, because balance is very important. Kemi is learning, writes Rob. Much less shouty and more controlled delivery.
I agree with them there.
Jim Pickard, well, in terms of tone, so do I. Jim Pickard, Deputy Political Editor of the Financial Times, I think has described it as, I'm not going to be able to find it now, am I? But one of the most, that question about what did you do in your 8 years? Did you ever mention it once? That's an absolute kebabbing.
It is. I mean, she stood up and said, yes, I have mentioned it. And a quick Hansard will double check whether that is true or not.
Not to quibble, but I think she's claiming I might not have mentioned it ever in the House of Commons. But
she said I mentioned it in other
I mentioned
speeches.
it in lots of speeches, but they go to a different school.
Sure, OK. Well, I'm sure that it won't take long for us to do a quick fact check of when exactly Kemi Badenoch.
But even if she did, she's never mentioned it in the House of Commons, even as Children's Minister.
Yeah, and Equalities Minister as well. And we know that equality and race is at the heart of this scandal. Yes. But yes, Keir Starmer, I think, had the upper hand on that one completely. You'd expect him to.
You say that. I mean, one of the most thorough skewerings I've ever ever seen during PMQ, says the deputy editor of the political editor.
Yeah, I think that's fine. And, you know, some of the things that Kemi Badenoch was saying just didn't land at all.
Why did she bring the Tavistock clinic into it?
Gosh, I do not know.
Okay.
Do not know. Maybe she's trying to prove what she has been talking about as her brief as Women and Equalities Minister.
That probably wasn't planned.
Potentially not.
Sounded a little bit like her brain was
searching for something to say,
yeah,
maybe.
Even as her mouth moved.
Yeah. But look, accusing someone like Jess Phillips of turning victims away, I don't know if you saw the anger on Jess Phillips' face.
I didn't understand that point.
What on earth is she talking about? It's just
I genuinely have no idea. I thought you would.
Complete tripe. It's obviously not true. So maybe the point that she was trying to make is that Jess Phillips has recently denied requests for an inquiry nationally into Oldham, saying that she believes that it should be done locally, and that's the way to get to the bottom of the problem, rather than doing a top-down government-led inquiry into this. Maybe that's what Kemi Badenoch was referring to, but accusing her of turning victims away, anybody that's met or spoke or listened to anything that Jess Phillips has said knows that to be complete and utter tripe.
And her rationale is persuasive as well, in that she's looked at the consequences of other inquiries and decided that the local ones actually produce more meaningful and substantive results than the national one did, albeit that if the 20 recommendations made by Alexis Jay had actually been implemented, then possibly that equation would change. Badenoch again claiming that they had accepted the recommendations.
Yeah, but just didn't do anything about it.
Just didn't implement it. So I'm accepting.
Governments do that a lot, to be fair.
Yeah, of course.
Political parties of all sides
They don't come back 2 years later and claim that the other lot are all to blame for everything.
Totally. And look, actually, you know what? Keir Starmer did step down his language in Prime Minister's Questions just then on 2 levels. Previously, on Monday, he'd said that anybody calling for a national inquiry was jumping on a far-right bandwagon.
No, he didn't say that.
Similar.
No, he didn't say that. He talked about echoing far-right phraseology, which is a distinct reference to the genocide rape apologist line, which is Elon Musk employing the great replacement theory, which is far-right. He hasn't suggested that anybody calling for an inquiry is far-right. That's your former friends on Fleet Street.
No, he didn't say that. He didn't say it like that.
He didn't. He didn't say that anybody calling for an inquiry is far right.
No, he didn't say that anybody calling for an inquiry was far right, but alluded to the fact that doing so would be considered to be jumping on the bandwagon of
joining in with Elon Musk's reasoning would be jumping on a far right bandwagon.
Sure, but I think the idea that calling for a national inquiry. Sure, whatever you like to think about it this way or the other way, I don't think that was language that was particularly helpful for Keir Starmer's argument.
Fine in the speech. It was only when it started appearing on the front page of the Telegraph and the Times that it got corrupted. I listened to every single word.
Yeah,
you listened
so I
to
was
every
there.
single word.
I was there, James.
Nobody came out of that room thinking that he said calling for an inquiry is far right.
No, I didn't say that.
But the newspapers did.
Not what I'm saying. Good. I think that destroyed what Keir Starmer's argument was, and he did step back today, and he now said that people on both sides, reasonable people on both sides, can call for an inquiry if that's what they want to do. And I think that was a step back from him. And if you look at his language of what he was just saying a minute ago, he's now saying, I've talked to the victims, and we missed that bit because we cut to Prime Minister's Questions.
This is
he said at the very top of Prime Minister's Questions, he has been meeting with victims today. Jess Phillips has come out as well and said, if the victims call for one, then we will have a look at it. That is, to me, a significant shift in the government's position. They've significantly stepped back on that. Your argument that you made off the break is that you feel that Keir Starmer doesn't, that the victims don't want an inquiry, so therefore
some do, but the organised bodies that have spoken so far, and of course Professor Alexis Jay would speak with their thoughts and feelings very much in mind when she says it's not necessary. Similarly, Andrew Norfolk, but it is a move. It is a shift. You're absolutely right, and it's an interesting one because the decision to call a national inquiry doesn't usually depend upon the views of the victims of the scandal. Do you see what I mean? The post office scandal, Hillsborough, these things are more political decisions. It's not quite the tail wagging the dog, but it is giving the power back to the victims, which in such an emotional case may not be a bad idea.
Yeah, and I think that what the government...
I don't know how you prove it, though. What do you do?
Well, exactly.
Have a vote?
Well, actually, the government have said this week that they're going to come forward with some new victims board, that they're going to be discussing all of these recommendations from all of this and working with them on the best ways to implement that. I imagine one of the first questions that Jess Phillips and the Prime Minister will be asking those people is whether that is something that they want to do. There will be a lot of sort of victim feedback into all of this and exactly what it looks like and how it works. As
there should be. A final question, because we crashed the news. It was much longer than usual, that. I don't know why. It's very odd for her to... Well, you can understand why. She kind of has to. And this is where the difficulty in turning an Elon Musk tweet into a parliamentary speech became so clear for Kemi Badenoch. You can't remove Keir Starmer's record from this conversation. And Elon Musk is obviously completely ignorant of the record. So when Kemi Badenoch cast herself as a sort of Elon Musk tribute act, she can't remove Keir Starmer's record in this field, but extraordinarily, she tried to. Yeah, saying, this is not about you. It's not about the CPS. I literally prosecuted these gangs. I literally changed the rules to make prosecution easier, but it's not about you. Yeah. You're a lawyer, not a leader. I mean, that was extraordinarily stupid. Yeah, I don't see why you can't be both. But interesting argument from Kemi Badenoch there. I'm not quite sure any of those would particularly... landing. We've got to go to the news where Amelia Cox is waiting with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
38 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. As I stress, this is entirely a personal opinion, but I think part of the reason why the continuing carnage in Gaza is failing to get anything like the coverage that it received for most of last year is because the media organisations which began this catastrophe, very supportive of Israel's policies, have elected silence over continuing to support what is going on. And it means that those of us who are keen to know what is going on are, given Israel's refusal to let foreign journalists into the territory, even more hidebound than usual. It's one of the reasons why I'm delighted to invite Dr. Victoria Rose into the studio. Victoria is a consultant plastic surgeon ordinarily working out of Guy's and St Thomas's and Chelsea and Westminster hospitals here in London, but also a frequent visitor in your professional capacity to Gaza. Twice, I think, before the October the 7th atrocity and twice afterwards. At risk of crassness, what was the difference between the before and the after?
A huge difference. Before, we were able to enter Gaza through Israel, so we would fly to Tel Aviv. We would have the backing of the British consulate. We would travel through the Erez crossing. We were allowed to take any equipment with us that we wanted, and we had planned missions to dedicated hospitals that would be prepared for our arrival. So we would have a caseload to do, mainly cases that we'd sort of discussed before, and you'd go in for the week and know exactly what was going on, where you were going, where you were staying, and what was happening. And then following October the 7th, we have been at the mercy of basically the WHO and the IDF as to where we can travel, which hospitals are still functioning, where we can work. There's limitation on kit that we can take in, and the restrictions are just getting more and more out of hand, making it harder and harder to achieve any sort of meaningful impact.
Do you understand why some of these restrictions are in place, or
no,
any of these restrictions?
Not really, no. It's not an area that hasn't worked closely with big NGOs and the United Nations and the WHO before. So no, I am struggling to understand some of the restrictions that are placed on us.
What sort of, and presumably the nature of the work that you do when you get there is incredibly different as well now.
Mainly now it's all blast and bomb injuries. So I'm mainly seeing people that have been involved in a bombing, and when the bomb explodes, part of or whatever they're in, wherever they are, masonry, car, whatever, it's whipped up in the explosion, and then it's ejected at a very high force, and it will hit a civilian, penetrate the skin, break the underlying bone, enter the brain, the lung, the abdomen, wherever it hits. And those are the bulk of the injuries that I deal with. Then we have burn injuries, from the heats of the explosion. And then we have a whole host of injuries from civilians running away because the area is so overpopulated and they're living in tents. There's no proper facilities for cooking. So children running into vats of boiling oil or boiling water, running into the road, being hit by a donkey cart, those sorts of injuries are very common.
You mentioned children. I think Oxfam's analysis shows more children killed in Gaza by the Israeli military last year than in the equivalent period in any conflict in the world over the past 18 years. Do they make up the bulk of your patients? Is there such a thing as a typical patient?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever done an operating list since the war that didn't have at least 50% children on it. 50% of Gaza's population are children. So there is no way that they were going to do well in this blanket bombing of the country.
And are you saving lives or are you just mitigating disability?
I think we are mainly saving lives. The patients that we can get in a timely fashion, we are saving their imminent life. But whether that goes on is very difficult to know. At the moment, the situation is so dire in terms of malnutrition. 600,000 children are malnourished, and that's not just that they're not getting their 5 a day, that's that they are in a position where they should be admitted to a hospital and treated for malnutrition. On top of that, you've got problems with shelter. None of the trucks are getting in. I think something like 52 trucks were planned to go into the north from the 1st to the 29th of December, and 48 of them were denied. Since the 1st of December to the 29th of December, of 461 aid trucks that were supposed to go in, only 35% got in. So that's only 159. I mean, that's shocking. And that's not just food. That's shelter, that's wash, that's your sanitation facilities, water facilities, and your medical aid. It's absolutely dire.
Why do you do this, Victoria?
I work for a charity called Ideals, which stands for International Disaster, Emergency Aid and Long-Term Support, and it's championed by 2 of my colleagues at King's College Hospital who are orthopaedic surgeons. They set up a project in 2013 to try and help train some Gazan surgeons in dealing with lower limb injuries, and that was their main project at the time, and they were going out sort of on a regular basis every other month. In Gaza, the medical training is quite difficult. If you look to the West, when I specialised as a plastic surgeon, I spent a lot of my time abroad training. So I was in Taiwan for a year, I've been to America to train, I've been to Sweden to train. But with the restriction on movement in Gaza, none of the doctors are allowed to even leave to attend medical conferences, so their training is quite limited. So the idea of the Lower Limb Project was to go to Gaza to help train the orthopaedic and plastic surgeons on how to use specialised equipment and how to deal with the injuries, and that's how we started. So we built up a body of colleagues that we know very well, and obviously when the war started, they were in touch with us, and the pictures that they were sending us were very different to the injuries we were dealing with before.
I know you're planning to go back. We may talk about that shortly, but I'm interested in the failure of aid to get through, or the obstruction of aid, the refusal of Israel to let aid get through. How does that impact upon the work that your colleagues are doing there? I suppose I'm wondering about what being malnourished might do to a patient in need of the kind of operations that you and your colleagues would undertake. It can't be an optimal situation if they're unhealthy in other ways, avoidable ways, even as you seek to deal with their injuries.
I mean, now malnutrition makes it difficult on lots of fronts for surgical procedures. Mainly for the children, it puts them at a lower weight, and obviously your weight limit depends on what sort of procedures we can safely undertake on you. And so there's quite a few things that we can't do because the children are so underweight. But more than that, it's about healing post-operatively. And without all the nutrients and vitamins that you need, wounds don't heal. So lots of the skin grafts that we do fail. Lots of the flaps that we're doing don't heal in a timely fashion. So they're open wounds for longer, more likely to get infected, less resources to fight the infections. It's really dire situation.
And you are going back? Or you hope to go back?
I hope very much to be going back in February.
Do you know what you'll find when you get there that is different from when you were last there in August?
I don't know yet, but we do have colleagues that will update us. I've had a WhatsApp this morning that told me which dressings or which solutions, skin cleaning solutions, are short of, and whether we could.
And do you take that in your luggage?
Yes.
Right.
And then I hope that it's not taken off me at the border.
But there's a chance that it could be.
You're told not to take anything like that in your luggage because it will be taken off you.
Medical supplies.
Yes. So when I went in August, I was specifically told that if I took any medical equipment, it would be removed.
By whom?
By the WHO, who have been instructed by the IDF.
Right. I don't know what to say in conclusion. Some of the things that you've said have shaken me, and I thought I was paying attention to what was going on there. How does it change you?
It sort of makes you want to help more because these people are in dire need of help. I think really for me, it makes me want to keep coming out and talking about it and letting people know the sort of situation that the Gazan population are in, irrespective of what's going on in the region politically and what will happen with that piece of land. You have to remember that this is a human rights issue and that a huge population, 2.2 million people, are in breach of, I think it's Article 3, the right to life, security. And that's what we need to focus on. There must be another way to sort this out than the way that it's being sorted out at the moment.
And finally, I mean, referring to what you are likely to find when you get there, already you're working in situations that would be absolutely inconceivable in this country. I read that you were using coconut soap and some equipment that was over 30 years old.
We were using vinegar to wash some wounds in because we didn't have any specific antiseptic dressings.
Well, good luck.
Thank you very much.
And how can people find out more about the charity that you work with?
We're online. Our website is ideals.org.
Dr. Victoria Rose, many thanks indeed, consultant plastic surgeon. I mean, by day you deal mostly in reconstructive surgery after mastectomies. But I don't want to say by night, but you understand the figure of speech. You do incredible work. Thank you so much. An awful lot of admiration and love coming in for you via my inbox as well, Dr. Rose. You are listening to James O'Brien. I should tell you, speaking of updates, that at least 19 Palestinians, including 8 children, were killed in Israeli airstrikes in southern Gaza overnight, according to local health officials. And I would remind you, because it's important to do so, that Israel launched its campaign to destroy Hamas in response to the group's 7th of October attack in 2023, which left 1,200 people dead and 251 taken hostage. The current estimate of people killed in Gaza since then stands at 45,930. It's 10-1.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 is the time. I'll read this because it got me right in what they call the feels. Victoria was my reconstructive surgeon. She saved my life after breast cancer. There's constant debate about British values. Indeed, we touched on it earlier, didn't we? She embodies the very best, selfless, world-class and the most courageous. Please thank her for everything she and her colleagues are doing for the most vulnerable of Gazans, and a hashtag no less, not all heroes wear capes. Well, from one hero to another. By day, Henry Riley is, of course, LBC's chief reporter. And by night, I believe he stands in for Clive Bull sometimes.
Yes, right. Absolutely. Not quite sure how to follow your last guest, James. Thank you very much for having me on.
I'll tell you why you're here. Well, you know why you're here. Let me tell everyone else. Because I'm interested in the things that a normal Tory party would be seeking to make hay with at, for example, PMQs. And the trials and tribulations, shall we say, of the City Minister, Tulip Siddiq, in normal circumstances, would probably be getting rather more attention than they are. So I thought we would redress that balance slightly with your help this afternoon.
Yes, and so Tulip Siddiq, as you say, the City Minister, Economic Secretary to the Treasury. The reason that's so significant is that role involves financial corruption and crime. And I think that for some time there have been stories about Tulip Siddiq and indeed her family. Dates back to last month, but really has intensified over the weekend, and it's led to Tulip Siddiq referring herself to the Prime Minister's ethics advisor, who is Sir Laurie Magnus. The reason the spotlight has been on Tulip Siddiq is she is the niece of the former Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Hasina was accused of being authoritarian in office. The new regime accused her of killings, crimes against humanity, and the killing of 800 protesters. She's also been accused of corruption and embezzlement while in office. She came to power in 2009. And was deposed last year. She's now fled the country. Right. The allegation against Tulip Siddiq, though, is that she is one of several family members who has benefited from people close to the regime. Now, any minister, this would be a potential problem. But given, as I say, her brief deals with corruption specifically, it is of importance and of interest. And what is interesting, James, is she does have the backing of Keir Starmer. Categorically came out, beginning of the week, said that he had confidence in her.
Okay.
Tulip Siddiq has acted entirely properly by referring herself to the independent advisor, as she's now done. And that's why we brought into being the new code. It's to allow ministers to ask the advisor to establish the facts. And yes, I've got confidence in her, and that's the process that will now be happening.
I mean, there's some slightly surreal elements to this story as well, aren't there? Like, I think she lived in a flat without knowing who owned it or where it came from, and still owns it, I think.
Still owns it.
So that's one of the allegations, is that somebody seeking to curry favour with her aunt made gifts to family members, perhaps including this flat in King's Cross that she lived in.
That's right. There are three properties in question, James. So firstly, there's one in Hampstead, which was gifted to Tulip Siddiq's sister, Azima, by Moin Ghani, who is a Bangladesh lawyer who represented the government that her aunt was involved with. You've then, as you rightly say, got another apartment in King's Cross. Tulip Siddiq owns that. She was given it by, she initially said that she was given it by someone else, but it turns out it's been given to her by Abdul Muttalib, who here
hasn't forgotten who gave them a flat.
Well, yes, exactly.
It's like Boris Johnson's wallpaper.
By Abdul Muttalib, who is an associate, again, of her aunt, the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh. And then you've got Abdul Karim Nazim, who has gifted Tulip Siddiq, or indeed she lives in his current house, which is in Finchley. And this is why this is particularly important, James, he is actually a registered official, London official, with the London arm of the Awami League, which is her aunt's political party. Now, Tulip Siddiq categorically denies any wrongdoing, have to make that clear.
And the allegations are coming very much from political opponents of her aunt in Bangladesh.
They are, absolutely. And so you've got two sides of this. You've got political opponents of Tulip Siddiq who say that she's been involved with, for instance, embezzlement of funds linked to Vladimir Putin. I mean, that she absolutely categorically denies that. The issue with regards to the properties, though, is in the past she made a mistake when she forgot to register to the Standards Committee that she was renting out one of these properties. Okay. It then turned out that was inadvertent. And what is also potentially going to come back to bite her, James, this was revealed by the Guardian newspaper yesterday, is that she may have misled the Mail on Sunday with regards to who owns one of those properties as well, saying that she denied it was owned by Muttalib, one of the people involved with the party. So it could be very damaging for Tulip Siddiq. One Labour MP who was particularly irritated by this, James, made the point to me that comparing it with Louise Haigh, they felt Louise Haigh had been treated unfairly. Yes. Not that they're necessarily comparable, but that was a spent conviction that Keir Starmer was aware of. There's a suggestion that Tulip Siddiq, being the neighbour of Keir Starmer in terms of constituencies, we know they're very close, is part of it. But she was due to go to China this week alongside Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, on an economic trip there. Hasn't gone, so she can assist the investigation. So it's still ongoing, and we'll hear very soon as to what exactly Sir Laurie concludes.
How do you now walk the tightrope between being an impartial reporter and increasingly taking up presenting duties? Because I was going to ask you, is your antennae twitching on this one? Do you think it's a bigger story than perhaps Keir Starmer realises. But of course, if you were presenting the programme, and don't get your hopes up too soon, if you were presenting the programme, you'd be able to express an opinion on that. But in your capacity as what is his official title, Eleanor? Senior reporter.
No, not senior, just reporter.
Oh, sorry, this is all bits.
I just say what a very good question that is, James.
Well, I do my best. See, there's a first time for everything, isn't
there?
Well done. Thank you.
Well done, you.
Oh, thank you. You can't tell. Can you express an opinion now? You can't. How are you walking this tightrope?
Not now. Sometimes on a Sunday morning, 4 till 7 a.m.
Well done. Nicely done.
Got it in there. I think I walk the tightrope, is how I'd put it. But in terms of whether my antennae is twitching on this one, I think given how sort of strident Tulip Siddiq has been in referring herself to the commissioner, she clearly thinks she's done nothing wrong, and I have nothing that would necessarily lead me to disbelieve her.
Very nicely done. Very nicely done. Henry Riley, thank you.
Well done, Henry.
Thank you.
I think just for the full house. Well done, Sheila.
I'm just dishing them out. I'm dishing them out.
Thank you, Sheila. That's it. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4 on LBC, no doubt being given a big well done by Sheila Fogarty, who joins you now.
Absolutely.
James O'Brien on LBC.